My name is Artem Avilov. I never thought I was going to reveal any of this to anybody who didn't already know. In 1962, a major event occurred in the Nenets province of Russia. You wouldn't have heard about it though, as everything about it was covered up. It was an event I decided I'd reveal to the public on my deathbed to escape the consequences of talking about it outside of the group of those in the know. There's no need for me to summarize it for you, as I've kept a journal in which I documented everything that happened during those odd months. I have transcribed the relevant part of the journal for all of you to read. I should mention I have nothing against anyone's religious beliefs. Just don't hurt people just because they don't believe what you believe. If they have to defend themselves, they will. With nothing more to say, here it goes. Entry 1. It's September 29, 1962. I'm with a team of 6, currently en route to an area southwest of Korever, where we will be conducting one of the most significant experiments since the Great Patriotic War. Our commander has been planning this out very carefully for months, and we aren't going to mess it up. Entry 2. It's around 5 p.m. We're at a station in an area surrounded by trees. There's some snowfall, and I'm shivering even in 2 layers of clothing. The experiment begins in 5 minutes. Let's see how far we get. Honestly, I'm kinda nervous. Opening portals is a huge deal considering we don't know where they will take us. I wonder if America is doing the same experiments right now. If they are, hopefully we're ahead of them. Entry 3. We've done it. When Abramov flipped the switch, both machines buzzed, then a light appeared between them. The light appeared as if the air was paper, and the light itself was a hole. The portal's open right now. This is unlike anything I've ever seen. Entry 4. Our investigator, Galkin, stepped slowly into the portal. After about 10 seconds, he stepped back out and described what he saw. English translation: green forests, dark objects gliding through the air. Then I heard sirens, but I came back before I could see anything more. Before we could ask any more questions, a fleeting presence filled the air. I glanced at the portal. A white mist was floating out. It was shiny and transparent. I exchanged looks with the others, who couldn't stop looking at the figure. The presence emanating from the figure became crushingly strong. Our commander ordered Abramov to close the portal. He flipped the switch, then the portal shrunk immediately, closing on the mist, which fell to the snow. The presence lifted, and the mist, writhing around in the snow, slowed down to a stop. Its shininess dissipated. Its white color changed to gray. Entry 5. We did not know what the mist was supposed to be in the context of its reality, even with Galkin's description. Sirens, black objects hovering in the sky. Generally speaking, it sounded like what Galkin witnessed was a reaction to a disturbance of an unknown magnitude. We asked him if he saw any markings anywhere. He told us he saw none. No tanks, no choppers, nothing. We asked him to go into detail about the black objects. Before he could answer, a bright light appeared in the spot the portal had closed. It expanded, taking the same appearance as the portal. For some reason, the portal had reopened, and it wasn't us. As we watched with looks of confusion, a dark creature hovered out of the portal. The appearance of this thing sent chills down my spine. It was a multitude of rotating rings covered with eyes. The eyes had a sinister glare, and the thing itself made this wet growling sound. It was atrocious. I could feel the chills from looking at this thing despite freezing in the cold air. I glanced at our commander. He had a look of disgust on his face, a look that turned into one of fear. He took out a pistol and opened fire on the creature, but it didn't stress. It just kept hovering. I couldn't help but take out my own pistol and fire at the thing myself. That didn't do anything either, but hopefully it was sending a message though. Eventually, the creature hovered back into the portal. I knew we should have expected this. We just discovered an alternate world in which, presumably, whatever creatures we saw were normal. Abramov flipped the switch, but the portal refused to close. He flipped it again. It wasn't closing. Then, something else stepped out of the portal. This time, it was a being who looked like a middle-aged human man. The only thing was, he had a red glow, an aura. I then noticed the otherworldly look of murderous rage in his eyes, a look that sent chills down my spine. He stood in front of us and began to speak in a soft tone. "Gentlemen, I'm speaking in a language you can understand, so I can be as clear as possible. I don't know who you are, and neither does the Offenum we sent, but you guys need to know that you have just triggered a mountain of chaos. We don't recognize you either," said our commander. but we do know you're not recognized as something that exists in our world. You're an anomaly, is that so? Asked the man. I can't get any information from your spirits for some reason, so I'll ask. Was what you just did an accident? Pardon me, asked our commander. You know what you did, said the man. You know what happened when you shut this portal? Oh, no, said our commander. There was an unknown, an uncertain misty figure seeping into our world. We had to close the portal. Interesting, said the man. I mean, I'm just curious. No matter what though, we're going to take measures into our own hands. What are you trying to say? Asked our commander. You killed Yahweh, said the man. That should say enough. I'll be back with the others soon, so prepare yourselves. This war will be a short one. The man stepped back into the portal. Once he was gone, the portal closed by itself. When he said Yahweh, the first thing I thought of was Yahweh from biblical literature. He even mentioned an Ophanim, which I'm sure I've heard a priest talk about some time ago. The people in that parallel world used the naming conventions of the Bible. What did he mean by Yahweh? I asked the others. Galkin brought up the Ophanim, telling us he had heard some Christians talk about it before. According to Galkin, the way the Christians described it sounded a lot like that floating, rotating ring creature we had just seen. I took it as coincidence. I wasn't ready to believe we had actually killed God. That idea sounded unfathomable. Crazy. The inhabitants of the alternate world probably just so happened to be named such and such. Galkin walked up to the transparent gray substance that was supposedly the corpse of some being called Yahweh and bent down to get a closer look. Entry 6. We took the substance to a lab and ran some tests on it. Once we got the results, we were shocked. We could determine the substance was made of a material we had not only never seen before, but have also never discovered before. Entry 7. We've been conducting experiments for the past few days. Further experimentation on the mystery material has led us to finding out how to destroy the material. This discovery is huge, because if we did kill a mystical being, and we were about to fight a war against its comrades, we were in dire need of weapons that would give us the upper hand. I'm filled with dread thinking about being overpowered by unknown entities, especially that damn rotating bunch of wheels. I'm going to assist in the construction of guns and bombs made for destroying those otherworldly beings, and I won't stop working until the weapons are ready for use. Entry 8. The weapons are ready. Backups have been assembled in case we need them. Now we wait for our preparation time to run out. When the glowing man returns, we will be ready. Top Soviet commanders have been covertly readying the Red Army for war in an operation called Fighting Angels. The only thing I'm worried about, however, is that we don't know what those beings have in their arsenal. Hopefully our weapons are strong enough to at least incapacitate them. Entry 9. This was a complete surprise. I woke up at 3 in the morning to the shouts of my comrades. One of them barged into my room and told me to hurry. They've arrived. The war has begun. All their men glow. This was it. I made sure I had the needed artillery with me. As I anticipated the defense, I could hear gunshots and sonic booms echoing from some distance away. As I sprinted out the door, all I could see were flashes of red and white lights off in the distance. It was freezing, but my blood was boiling with eagerness, adrenaline, and dread. On my way to the scene, a soldier running a few feet ahead of me combusted into a white light. My adrenaline spiked. I ducked behind a nearby bush and poked my head up to look for any glowing men. One was headed my way, shrouded in a deep red glow that emphasized its face. It had a deep look of anger and determination. I aimed and opened fire. The glowing man was torn to shreds, vanishing into the night. The guns worked, but did we have enough ammunition to avoid America or anybody coming close to finding out about the war and the outcome of our experiments? Our commanders decided we'd be receiving news via word of mouth rather than through radio communication. Code phrases were to be used otherwise. Deaths would be covered up as well. Any dead soldiers were going to be cremated, then honored in secret at a later date. Nothing about the war was allowed to be recorded or broadcasted, and every civilian in Nenets who were aware of the war was to be sworn to secrecy. Our commanders were really doing the best they could to cover this up. Day 1 was full of uncertainty. The glowing men were everywhere. Every other minute there'd be 1 or 2 of them running along the trail. It was odd seeing them be torn up by our new bullets. It was something out of a dream. I only got the opportunity to sleep every once in a while, even despite attempting to sleep in an underground cellar. I was too busy trying to control my breaths. At times, I would nearly fall asleep, but then I'd hear the sound of leaves being ruffled, and I'd be wide awake again. That all kept going for 3 weeks before things began to slow down. The glowing men began arriving in smaller groups, and their faces were becoming more and more vengeful. Still, I could only duck and hope for the best, killing these dreadful creatures from another world before they could kill me. Entry 10. It's week 3, day 5. I finally received some news. A soldier walked up to me with a look of exhaustion on his face. The glowing men are cornered. Our men are guarding the portal. They're shooting each and every glowing being that comes through. Entry 11. Week 4, day 1. I awoke at 4 to a strange, wet growl. I grabbed my gun and tiptoed to a spot beside the window. The growling was giving me chills. As it went on, I peeked out the window. My heart sank when I saw it floating underneath the light emanating from a lamp post. The wheels, the floating rotating wheels, covered with eyes. It was just hovering in one spot. It shined in the light, but it was still ugly and monstrous. I aimed and fired at the thing, shattering my window in the process. The bullet hit the creature, but all that came of that was a white steam that started to flow towards me. When the steam cleared, the creature started moving towards me. Its silhouette and speed made my stomach turn. I fired at it again and hid behind the wall to get out of the view of the window. White steam seeped in through the shattered window. I took deep breaths in an attempt to calm my adrenaline. It was almost pitch dark, but I noticed the wheeled creature's dark silhouette as it floated in. It was only slightly darker than the night. I fired at it again. It stopped, but I couldn't tell if I had done any damage to it. My door squeaked open. A flash of light illuminated the face of the person entering. It was a man, a soldier, my brother. I watched as he combusted into a human-sized white flame which itself illuminated the entire room, including the wheel creature. It had a few bloody holes and an unmoving wheel. My heart dropped a second time. This thing can kill, threaten lives. My brother, he was incinerated like he was nothing, his existence gone in the blink of an eye. I fired 3 more shots at the creature. Finally, it combusted into a white flame, the heat from which nearly burned my skin. When the flame died down and the heat dissipated, the fear was all that remained. The glowing men were one-shot kills, but the wheel creatures, we were going to need to fire several times, which could lessen our time and amount of bullets. I can't begin to think about going to sleep right now, for the sake of my life. I'm too exhausted to transcribe more of the journal right now. I'll post more entries as soon as I've transcribed them. I won't be poisoned just yet, so I have time. Here are some more entries from the journal. I probably have 2 days to give you the rest. Anyway, the Soviet Union killed God while conducting an experiment with interdimensional portals. Then they went into a covert war with a large group of glowing men. Entry 12. On week 8, day 3, I got word the glowing men stopped coming out of the gateway. The portal had closed, and a letter was left behind. Apparently the letter read, "We don't and can't understand your world. Reading the minds of your people is impossible," which could only mean one of 2 things. 1. An alternate Yahweh is the almighty God of your world who isn't letting us into your minds and spirits. 2. There is no God ruling your world. Yeshua, the Son of Yahweh, has taken the throne in heaven and now oversees heaven and earth. He has instructed us to turn the other cheek and close the portal to your unpredictable world. I chuckled at the incredulity of what I heard. So it was God, and we had really killed him. But this couldn't be it, right? I lost my brother to God's vengeful angels. If I had to fight and be in hell with him, then so be it. Once I reported back to the base, I met my commander for the first time in weeks. "So, the war ended today?" "Huh?" I asked. "That was another intense one. It ended 2 days ago," said the commander. "Did you get the news about the glowing men being God's angels and the fact we killed God?" "Yes," said my commander. "Top commanders want to open the portal and sweep heaven for its crimes against our union. If Jesus really keeps his word, we shouldn't have a hard time doing so," I said. I was glad the war was over. As for the wishes of those at the top, I can't stand the thought of going through the portal. The angels wanted us dead, and their creatures were terrifying, on top of being deadly, but I can shake it to defend the union and avenge my comrades. Entry 13. Over lunch that day, discussions surrounding God and the Bible was mounting. God was dead, and his angels avenged him by killing a bunch of us, and we were supposed to take it. What surprises me is that God was real in the first place. I was raised an atheist, although that's probably due to Stalin's crackdown on Christianity. My parents never spoke of any religion or God, so practicing religion always seemed alien to me. I had a babysitter who was obsessed with God, but I never practiced religion with him. I don't think I need to understand what God's army was trying to convey when they killed my brother, but it for sure wasn't all that good. Entry 14. I'm sitting on my bed right now, having just read a letter from Khrushchev. This is going to be interesting. Moments ago, letters were handed out to each of us. I could only guess it had to do with Yahweh. I opened mine up. It was a statement from Khrushchev. I read it all the way to the end without hesitating. This is when it read, "These past 2 months, we suffered great casualties, all at the hands of beings religions worship and call good. Reviewing the Holy Bible, I have found multiple instances of God, or Yahweh, committing atrocious acts during the time he was alive. Exodus 21:20-21. 20 Anyone who beats their male or female slave with a rod must be punished if the slave dies as a direct result. 21 But they are not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two, since the slave is their property. Leviticus 25:44-46. 44 Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. 45 You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clans born in your country, and they will become your property. 46 You can bequeath them to your children as inherited property and can make them slaves for life, but you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. 1 Peter 2:18 Slaves, in reverent fear of God submit yourselves to your masters, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh. Remember, slave labor was a thing in America, and slave owners used the Bible to confirm their supposed righteousness. Then there was Job. Job worshipped God more than anybody, but had his family and pets killed by God as a way of proving to Satan he could kill and abuse the people who followed him, and they would still have faith in him because of his insistence that he was great. God was so full of himself, he betrayed his own people to prove himself and to serve his own ego. 1 Samuel 15:2-3 This is what the Lord Almighty says, I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. 3 Now go, attack the Amalekites, and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them, put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. Children and infants were included, not spared despite their innocence. I thought the Bible was fiction written in a time when people killed those who related to criminals by blood, but seeing, as we've made contact with a world where beings like the ones written about in religious scripture are very real, I can proclaim we have been attacked by another cult army led by a mad egotistical tyrant who would go as far as eliminating those who don't follow their beliefs, as well as those who aren't able to make rational or irrational decisions yet. We will reopen the portal, then we will march into heaven and overthrow whoever has succeeded Yahweh and replace them with a victim of their forced suffering. Your commanders will give you details on when Operation Fighting Angels will continue. Seems like I'll be heading into a land of horror and uncertainty. I just got consumed by chills recalling the off in him. Every time I recall it, I get a sense of impending doom. Hopefully I can take them down before they take my life. Entry 15. I'm about to head out to the portal. A ton of us are going in. This is the weirdest thing we've ever faced, but all I want to do is to make it out of this alive. Entry 16. Well, I can say I made it into heaven, but I'm completely lost right now. A pit formed in my stomach as I neared the portal. We went in a single line, probably the longest one I had ever been in. As I stepped through the light, I nearly froze, but then I saw the other side. A healthy green forest, a beautiful blue sky. I looked to my left and noticed some mountains in the distance. Despite all of that, there was an eerie calmness, like you're being watched by somebody, but you can't figure out where they are. As we walked through the forest, there was tension in the air. I held my gun close to my face and continued to follow behind my comrades. Soon enough, I heard an ear-puncturing boom, then was blinded by a light and pushed back into the soldier behind me. We both fell onto the muddy ground while the others fired in the direction the boom happened. I rolled into a bush and refocused while breathing heavily. Peeking out of the bush, I noticed two glowing men navigating through the trees. I fired at them both as quickly as I could. I hit one of them, but missed the other. He shot a look of determination in my direction. I fired at him before he could react. I just kept going, looking around, waiting until I was in the clear, then moving through the trees, heart beating fast, as I made my way to a good spot to take cover for when I needed to. I had to have traveled miles through that forest before anything else happened. I heard some shouting, followed by multiple sonic booms, echoing throughout the area. My heart sped up even more. I ducked behind a bush and remained alert. I've moved several times and shot countless glowing men. Every single time I'm about to take a shot, I dread missing the target. I would die for my country, but I wish to continue serving Khrushchev and his anti-Stalinist agenda. Entry 17. After a few minutes of rest, I sensed an overwhelming presence. I peeked out of the bush and, beyond the tips of the trees, there was a giant set of rotating wheels adorned with eyes. It had to have been miles wide and miles tall. My heart sank. I watched as a dozen shiny white beings descended into the forest. My view of them was soon obscured by the trees. I had no other choice but to run and make sure I continued contributing to the mission. I jumped out of the bush and sprinted for my life, navigating the dense forest. As I ran, a series of ear-puncturing booms shook the ground beneath me. About 10 minutes of heavy breathing later, I reached a cliff. Off in the distance was a rail yard on the edge of a small town. It was packed with probably hundreds of people. However, I was too far away to be able to determine if they were my comrades. As I watched on, I heard a thud behind me. I turned around and saw a glowing white being with 4 heads. 3 of them looked just like the heads of animals. One of them looked just like a human head. Before I could react, I was knocked unconscious by an invisible force. I awoke in a basement with cracked walls and dented pipes. A man who looked to be in his 50s was sitting in a chair directly across from me. He had shiny hair. My first thought was that I was kidnapped. However, this man wasn't glowing. What did he want? He chuckled. "So, you're another one of those soldiers from a different dimension," he said. "Are you an angel?" "No, I don't associate myself with people who exclude and kill those who don't follow a torturous so-called truth." "You're willing to fight with us?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "You guys did something that shattered our universe. The uprising is now going to start 3 years earlier than I had originally planned." The man balled his hands up into a fist. Then, a patch of blurriness appeared between the man's face and my own. The blurry orb became an image of a white church with a crowd of people huddled around it. I could see movement in the crowd. The devil was showing me a film, or a form of extrasensory vision. He explained it was what was going on all over planet Earth. There were religious people huddled in and around each and every religious building on the planet. Young people, old people, animals too, not just people. He then showed me a different vision, one similar one to the last, but taking place at the Notre Dame Cathedral. People were clogging the roads. Some were sitting on top of cars. When God died, the world went into a collective shock. Since then, depression statistics have skyrocketed. People have become agitated, blaming one another for God's death. He showed me a vision of dead bodies lying in the streets of New York City. If I went to Earth to spread the truth about God, I would be outcasted. God tried to frame me as the evil one, and he did so successfully, just by making me a main antagonist. Then, over thousands of years, using popular culture to frame me as a giant red bull with horns who had a lot of spiritual power and did all the bad things God did. Wars, natural disasters, cannibalism. God enabled that stuff, not me. I've been hoping to one day put an end to God's ruthless vengeance. I couldn't be anything more than amazed, especially with the part about him being framed as the evil one. I couldn't believe it, but I was speaking with the actual devil. They follow him so blindly, the devil said, like they don't know he's in support of torture. They spin it as his great plan, but that's just rationalizing the torture they're being put through. They were told, "Hey, follow this man, for he is the righteous one." They all just went with it, and he won. Anyone who disobeyed him was executed, even despite being commanded not to kill. Some of them argue it's righteous, but if killing is bad, it's bad. I've killed, but only because God forced me to for the sake of his own ego. God killed 2 million. I killed 5, not 5 million, just 5. One with the power of God could bring those 5 lives back. Yahweh didn't want to. I still couldn't believe it. The devil was on my side. I kept listening, as he told me the New Testament was God gaslighting his followers. Just because somebody apologizes for something they did doesn't mean they didn't do it. If you instill trauma, don't expect somebody to come back to you. Then you have those religious extremists who harm people in the name of God. They're brainwashed, abusive children. This was beginning to hit close to home. I tried to sway the conversation to the uprising he mentioned. If God is dead, who are we going to bring down other than the angels? The devil shot me an understanding look, a distinct one I had never been given before. Who do you like? Women, men, we've constructed many different types of weapons for this very patriotic war. It's alright. You do what you're actually comfortable with doing. You're accepted here. The devil went on to explain the uprising. Now that God was dead, all we had to do was finish off his army. Easier said than done. There were not enough soldiers in the devil's army to give, in his words, the captives of hell, the upper hand. That was until the army I'm in angered God's angels. Half of them swarmed my reality, and apparently we had massacred them all. They were unfamiliar with the laws of my reality, but were too vengeful to stay away. Now the remaining half sit in heaven, having massacred nearly all of my comrades. My heart dropped at the news. The devil, however, told me I didn't need to feel an inch of concern, as some time ago he had convinced a third of God's army that the deity they worshipped so much was actually the devil lying to and gaslighting everyone. The angels believed that to be true, and so they mutinied. They all got sent to hell for uprising. Apparently, my army killed as many angels as those who mutinied, leaving 1/3 left. How many angels did my comrades and I kill? I asked. Over 1 million, said the devil. What about guardian angels? There has got to be billions of them, especially after the baby boom. How is 1 million 1/3? Guardian angels don't fight God's wars. They surveil children, the devil said. What's Jesus Christ doing in all of this? I asked. Jesus Christ was the human manifestation of God, not a separate entity. Now, it's time to get to the planning stage of the uprising. The devil laid out his plan. Essentially, we were going into heaven in groups, then using guerrilla warfare to destabilize whatever order they currently had. After that, a vote would be held for a new leader, a new God, a God who would establish a new order and clean up the mess Yahweh made. But there was a catch, one that wasn't surprising. There's a 50% chance you perish in the uprising no matter how well you take cover. My heart still sunk, however, but these beasts had to be stopped. I was in a position where I could help sway the order of heaven, which, as concept, was still very incredulous to me. Either way, it was what I had to do. My intuition was screaming at me to go and fight. I was going to end this. After the plans were discussed, the devil told me he wanted to show me a little something. He brought me upstairs to his living room. There, he told me to look out the window. When I did, a pit formed in my stomach. People were hanging from the tree branches of every tree. The grass was yellow. Parked cars were vandalized. Bones were lying on the rooftops of homes. I shuddered and looked back at the devil. Who did those bodies belong to? Innocent doctors, psychologists, teachers. They were men who liked men, women who liked women, people with blemishes, women who wanted to be without a husband and choose what to do with their own lives and their own bodies. And some of those bodies you see are still alive. You couldn't tell which ones though. They're in shock due to multiple factors. I'm sleeping in the basement tonight. I recommend you follow through on that promise. Who in their right mind would murder innocents? The devil sighed. At least the Soviets are a necessary shield, he whispered to himself. Why wouldn't we be? Oh, no, I meant that differently. No. Anyway, before we do anything else, I'm going to show you a wider picture of the world out there. The devil brought me out to his car, a yellow 4-door with dents and scratches all over. I was taken on a drive. Moving down the road, I gagged as bodies hung from the trees. Some swayed, the road was cracked, and had a few holes filled with red liquid. Moving along a main road, I noticed a very similar scene, but there weren't as many cars around as I thought there would be on a road like that. A few minutes later, still moving down the road, the devil pointed out a gang stabbing taking place in a parking lot. People were walking by, looking dead in the face, not reacting to the dispute. The devil then hit the brakes. A dozen, I'm not sure what to call them, small spiky animals, who spit mini fireballs every 3 seconds, were walking across the street. One of them was carrying what looked like a charred human hand, but I'm not sure. These things were clearly dangerous, and my heart rate increased as I waited for them to pass. Eventually, they passed. Moments later, a truck with an eerie logo passed us from the opposite direction. Forbidden meat, it's not immoral. What was that supposed to mean? If somebody comes to the door and asks you to meet them at a special restaurant at 5 p.m., and they don't have anything official on them, close the door, the devil said. That was the only thing he said to me the whole drive. The rest was just pointing. Aside from the first few things I mentioned, I witnessed a young man being shot in the neck, saw boarded up windows on several shopping centers, saw 5 crumbled homes, 10 groups of homeless individuals, and a lamb with 5 eyes that stood in one spot, staring at me with a look of sinister determination. It was a crazy scene out there, but I guess that's what I had to know. The cage God put innocent people in was the same place he put killer creatures, murderers, and other monsters. The next entry, I'm sitting on a bed in the basement. Well, 2 mattresses stacked on top of each other would be a better description. I hear animalistic screams echoing from all directions. Outside, there's now a deep pit of dread in my stomach. I don't know what might happen to me while I'm asleep. Hopefully I'll wake up without a mark. The windows down here don't have curtains, so I'm going to turn out the lights so none of whatever the hell's out there will see me. I managed to save myself one more day. Here are the rest of the entries. Entry 19. My heart's pounding. I don't know where I am, and I can't say for sure whether I'm safe. After I set out with my group, we bypassed the guards by tunneling under heaven until reaching the sewers. I guess the devil thought the sewers would be mostly unguarded, but once we set foot in them, shouting started coming from both directions. Glowing men. My heart dropped. There was nowhere to duck. I shot at the men, relieved to see them combust. As we trekked through the dimly lit sewers, I took note of how horrible it smelled. It didn't matter so much every time we neared a corner. My adrenaline level skyrocketed. Would there be glowing men waiting for me? Would I live? I resorted to just shooting blindly around the corner. It worked 5 times. Eventually, we reached a drain one of my group members claimed was the first one from the city. She told me to follow behind. Since they could hover, they'd just fly up out of the sewer. Since I couldn't hover, I'd climb, but I'd be guarded in a circular formation. From there, I'd shoot any angel coming overhead. Easier said than done. I need to stop expecting ease of force from my end. Once I climbed up to the street, the sonic booms began. A dozen angels flew above the street. I opened fire for my life, taking out each angel. As they flew close enough for me to hit, I barely paid attention to what was happening on the ground around me. All I heard were booms, shattering glass, car alarms, and shouting from all directions. At one point, I needed to take cover. I looked around and saw all the chaos. I ran through a shattered shop window and hid behind a table. An angel landed on the ground. I shot at it. It combusted. As I anticipated the second another angel revealed itself, a deep male voice hit my right ear. Hey, you from the kingdom of the devil, or are you of God? I looked to my right and saw an elderly man pointing a double-barrel shotgun at my head. Some shouting echoed in from outside. I looked and saw 2 angels sprinting towards the shop. Are you of God? Answer the question. I jumped out from behind the table. The 2 angels' eyes widened. They aimed their guns right at me. I grabbed the shotgun wielder by the hips and pulled him in front of me. He combusted into white flames while I jumped behind his desk for cover. I jumped up and fired at both of the angels. Both of them combusted as well. The war went on for weeks. Those weeks weren't so different from weeks I spent fighting wars in the past. In the middle of week 4, I woke up as the sun began shining and noticed how silent the city was. Perhaps all the civilians had evacuated. During my journey through the war-torn city, I came across a restaurant with shattered windows. I took a look inside. The tables were all lying on their sides. Food was strewn all over the floor. As I looked around, a wet screeching noise echoed from the sky. I looked up. A giant off-in was about to fly overhead. My heart sank. I jumped through a shattered window to hide in the restaurant. I knew it took several bullets to take out a small off in him, but I couldn't imagine what it would take to bring down a giant one. The dreadful sound of the off in him peaked, but once it began to pass, I took note of a television on the far end of the room. I walked up to it and switched it on, hoping to get some news updates. I flipped through the channels until I found a broadcast showing a giant off in him hovering above a city I couldn't recognize. Many of the skyscrapers in the city were on fire. Then explosions rocked about 10 or 15 of the skyscrapers, taking each of them down. Meanwhile, fires were spreading like crazy across the surrounding forest. And with that, heaven's final option is hammering the city at the center of hell. The destruction of evil in the name of God has begun. I watched in horror. Heaven's final option. Innocents are dying. People are being tortured. As I fumed, I heard the sound of somebody stepping on a piece of glass outside. I didn't have time to turn my head before I blacked out. I woke up in someplace dark. Feeling around, I felt a cold, hard tiled floor. What room was I in? Who captured me? I felt around some more and found a lamp. I switched it on, revealing the room I was in. Torn up papers, photos, and posters were strewn all over the ground. Entry 20. After writing up the last entry, I looked through the torn up papers. Some of them depicted God, Jesus, and different angels. Others were pages from the Bible. I held one of the torn pages and read half of what was on it. I crumpled it up and threw it at the wall. The door creaked open. I jumped, hoping it wasn't one of those glowing men. I grabbed my gun and aimed it at the door. I was relieved to see it was a non-glower. She had black hair and looked to be in her mid or late 20s. Her eyes widened. "No, it's okay," she said. "I'm on your side. Your fellow soldiers are going to be back soon." I was relieved, but I didn't know who she was. Was she associated with the devil? Or was she someone else entirely? I asked her. "Eve," she said, "your fellow soldiers need you." "I know they do," I said. "We have creatures to eliminate. You've already pretty much won the war. Don't let your guard down, though, because the angels avenging God are destroying hell as we speak. Your soldiers need you to help them bring in a bomb you and them call the Paracosma." According to them, the Paracosma was an atomic bomb they were developing as part of the construction of anti-anomalous weaponry following the accidental death of God. I told her this, but I also informed her of the fact we hadn't tested it due to our efforts to conceal our war on Yahweh's spirits. We'd only tested in the most dire of times when a war with the West wouldn't sound so threatening. She told me I was ordered by the words of my commander to help bring the bomb into heaven. I told her I needed to be shown something official just in case, even though she already knew of the weapons development project at all. She brought me out into a large room with shiny marble walls, a high ceiling with 3 skylights, and a marble-tiled floor. Several of my comrades were conversing with each other in the corner, some recognizable from previous missions, and others not. One of the ones I recognized, Dimitri, told me the order was legitimate. Then he told me we needed to get back to the portal. A pit formed in my stomach. "Yes," I said. "Selvi, I know," he said. "I heard of the experiment, the portal closing in on God, and just like that, they died." I didn't have much to say. My head was still spinning from everything that happened. So I asked him who he was. "I'm the one you're going to help," he said. "Is it still open?" I asked. "How far away is it from here?" "Where are we?" "Yes, it's still open," Vladimir said. "The devil has our backs, though. Don't worry, now get prepared." My comrades left the room, leaving me alone with Eve. Eve walked over to a gold-plated chest that sat a little over to my left. She opened it up, reached into it, and pulled out a stone with words engraved into it. She placed the stone on the floor, in front of her. "What does it say?" I asked. "They're the 10 Commandments," she said. "Well, 5 of the 10. The other stone is still in the chest. I'll be taking care of that one right after I take care of this one." She brushed her hair back with her hands. I wasn't sure what she meant when she said she'd be taking care of them. That was until she pulled a jagged rock out of her pocket, bent down towards the stone, and began to scrape the first commandment where it was engraved in the stone, leaving white scratches. "I don't know if you've read my story, but I was the one who was manipulated into eating an apple," she said. "Adam was responsible for me, and blamed me for him failing to be responsible. Adam was punished, and so was the serpent, but so was I." She began to scratch out the second commandment. All that apple contained was knowledge on how to separate good from evil. That's what God wanted to keep hidden, and he expected us to know any better. The devil wants to set up a new kingdom led by a new leader, and there's been some talk of me most likely being the next leader. If so, I'm going to undo all the terrible things Yahweh did. She moved on to the third commandment, scraping it like no tomorrow. Job refused the position. He said he just wants his livelihood back. Adam finally realized what he was doing when he blamed me for him not taking responsibility, and the devil told me he doesn't plan on being the next leader. So that leaves me. Isn't the devil very powerful too? I asked. Not as powerful as you may think, she said as she began to scrape the fifth commandment. He's not the exact opposite of God. He just worked for God. At some point, he realized how bad God was and rebelled against him and his order. He's more of a political influence, but anybody can be God with a specific piece of knowledge. My comrades entered the room. I walked up to them, determined to get the rest of the fight over with. One I was more familiar with, Dom looked into my eyes. You ready, Artem? He asked. Yes, this place is very chaotic. Almost everything here has thrown me off guard. But if I keep up my willingness to fight and defend, I should be able to defend myself against those atrocious creatures. My comrades all nodded their heads in agreement. Despite the agreement, there was something else on my mind. My location. Where the hell was I? I asked my comrades as I heard the second stone be placed on the floor. You're standing in God's mansion, Vladimir said. We wiped out most of the guards and low-level employees. We hoped Noah would be here as well, but we did not find him. Still, they had some pretty powerful guards. It took minutes to kill some of them, but we pulled it off. We can now sincerely say the throne of God is occupied. Where's the devil? I asked. He's hiding out on Earth, Vladimir said. He believes we can pull this off, but we also need to get the 4 giant off-anim creatures to hover in one spot, wiping out their guards. And low-level employees should do it, I said. It will not, Vladimir said. They can be replaced. There needs to be a big enough distraction to get all 4 of them in the same area. The devil has a plan he hopes will work. He didn't tell us what it was, so it must be a job for a smaller set of higher-up individuals. He hopes, I asked. There's a 60% chance it will, he says. Vladimir said. We are dealing with powerful beings. How powerful is the Paracosma? I asked. Is it anything like AN 602? It's twice as powerful, comrade, Vladimir said. Are the devil and Eve going to be hiding in a shelter? I asked. The devil told me Adam and Eve will be hiding out on Earth, watching heaven's central city get vaporized, Vladimir said. Well, alright then, I said. Let's continue. We must wait for the devil's comrades to arrive, Vladimir said. Remember, I know, I interrupted. We're bags of flesh going up against anomalous beings. But now that we have more time to discuss things, what do you think the effects of this will be? We discovered interdimensional travel. It happened to be this dimension of all the possible ones. And if the West finds out what we've been doing, they'd hold it against us. We'll see where we go from here, Vladimir said. I nodded my head in agreement. This did feel like the beginning of something, and I was going to experience it. I turned towards Eve, who was reaching into the golden box. Both stones were sitting on the floor, all scraped up. Nobody needed those commandments if they were also commanded to do things that contradict them. Eve, I asked. Yeah, Eve said, pulling an object out of the box. Thank you, I said. This will all be over soon. Eve was holding in her right hand a golden goblet cup adorned with red diamonds close to the rim. You're welcome, she said. Eve tilted the cup. A red liquid spilled out onto the floor. Once all the liquid had been poured out, Eve set the cup on the ground and stomped on it, making a sizable dent. She stomped on the cup again, and again, and again until it was pretty much flat. Then she looked at us. You guys need to leave, she said. This room is off limits now. Alright, let's go, Dom said. We stepped out of the room, leaving Eve to her business. In the lobby, we met up with the devil's comrades, who asked us if we had everything we needed. We each told him yes. With that, we were on our way to finish this. We marched down the deserted main road, past all the abandoned shops with blown-out windows. We were expecting just a few angels, but then that noise came back, that wet growl. I looked up and saw a giant off-anim slowly appearing in the sky. The clouds separated for it, and I felt terrified at it. My heart sunk so deep, I froze for a second. Get to the sewer, I yelled. It was our only way out of this one. I couldn't stress it enough either. It had to have seen us out in the open. one of Satan's men ran to the nearest sewer drain and pulled it right off. My comrades and I were told to go first. I sped down there, then I began jogging south. I looked behind me, seeing my comrades all having made it down, and the devil's comrades floating in. However, only half of them were in the sewer. When a blinding white light beamed through the manhole, one of the remaining comrades shouted, telling us to run. I expected it to take at least an hour for us to get to the portal, but 2 hours had gone by, and we still weren't there. The smell was unbearable. I had no idea if a horde of glowing men were about to swarm us, and we only had half the devil's men we were supposed to have. My fear turned into reality when I started hearing familiar shouting echoing from both directions. Great, it happened so quickly. My memory is hazy, but what I can say is, when we heard the voices, the devil's comrades shielded us. Once they rounded a corner out in front of us, it was just deafeningly loud booms. For 5 seconds, they waited silently, then before we could count to 10, a couple more rounded the corner. They were shot and killed. One of the devil's men, David, signaled for us to remain quiet some more as he walked towards the edge of the intersected sewers. Before he reached it, a black rectangle with moving eyes peered around the corner and shot David with a beam of light. Dread overtook me. There was an off-venom down here. Why was I so afraid of them, other than because they were killer creatures? Their appearance was just terrifying. Creepy, all those eyes. I aimed my gun at it, waiting for it to peer around the corner again. Another of the devil's men started towards the spot the off-venom was. When he neared the spot, he tossed a grenade. It exploded. The off-venom hovered out from behind the corner, while making the worst screech I've ever heard. A third of it had been blown off. It was leaking heavily and was barely able to stay up. It landed on the ground, continuing to screech. I opened fire at it. One shot, it was gone. Eventually, David told us to stop moving. He pointed to a drain up ahead and told us that it was the nearest drain to the portal. This was almost over. Good. But then David told us we were miles away from the portal, so we needed to be quick. As he told us the giant off-venom were probably hovering around the central city. He got a call on his radio. This may be shocking, but the devil's plan has failed. We need to get through the portal before any angel finds out what our intentions are. That couldn't be too hard, right? We climbed out of the sewer. The sweet smell of fresh air was delightful, a great break from the stench. All we needed to do was hurry through the forests. We ran for what felt like an hour. We avoided buildings, we avoided farmhouses, we avoided everything. It was going to take a while to reach the portal, so we discussed hideouts for when we needed to sleep. At some point, we came across a bunker. David told us to get inside. Before I could step in, somebody was shouting in our direction. "What are you people doing with my shelter?" I looked to my left and saw a farmer. Training, I lied. He picked up a shotgun and aimed it at me. "You guys look like those invaders. Get out of here or I'm calling the police," he shouted. In defense, I shot him. He combusted. I stepped into the bunker where I met up with my comrades. After we woke up, David told us we could pile into the pickup truck in the driveway and proceed with the rest of the trip. He insisted on protecting us on our way there. There were 6 Soviets, including me, so 2 could sit in the front and 4 could sit in the bed of the truck. Seemed simple enough. After breakfast, we made our way to the truck, my comrades, and I hopped into the truck while the devil's men took their positions around the truck. Then we began our journey down the roads of the farmland. Adrenaline rushed through me as I thought about the possibility of being found and vaporized by a giant off-venom. About 10 minutes away from the portal, the truck broke down. We pulled up to the side of the road and made the rest of our way on foot across the calm forest. Some moments into the walk, I saw a white light shining in the distance. That was it. Shortly after I spotted the portal, I heard it again, that echoing growl. I looked up for a quick second and saw a giant off-venom. I picked up my pace until I was running as fast as my legs could take. Once out of the forest, my adrenaline spiked. If the off-venom couldn't see me in the forest, it could see me out in the open field of grass. It took me a few seconds to realize the off-venom hadn't harmed me, although it seemed like it would have already. I could still hear it growling up there. Worse, I felt its stares. They burned my psyche and were chilling as hell. I reached the portal and, without looking back, sprinted through it. I didn't at all mind the transition from the warm climate to the snow and freezing air. The second before I ran through the portal, I felt 4 sets of eyes staring at me from behind, followed by 4 thuds behind me as well. The air got warmer too. I didn't have much time to think about it, as I needed to get to the arsenal in which the Paracosma missile was housed. I was then ordered to guard the portal, so I went over and stood by it. While on guard, a gruesome and terrifying statement was made to my comrades, and I didn't change what I thought about heaven or God. Not at all. In fact, it made it all a whole lot worse. It happened so suddenly. I happened to be glancing at the portal when a human skeleton covered in ash was wheeled out by a flaming man. It's hard to describe where his flames began and his body ended. The air heated up like an oven in his presence though. He gave me a smirk, then he said, "Let this be an example of what will happen if any of you step into heaven again. The flame consumes the wicked." He turned around and stepped through the portal back into heaven. The air began to freeze, but my disgust wasn't going anywhere. Once my comrades arrived with the missile, it was pointed out the portal was in the wrong position to fire a nuclear missile aiming for the center of heaven. So we put the machines powering the portal up on a platform, then connected the platform to a helicopter. Once the helicopter had lifted the portal high enough, we carefully aimed the missile at the needed angle. Within minutes, we got 3 of our commanders to vote on the decision to covertly launch the missile. All 3 of them voted to proceed with the launch. It was time. Not a minute after the vote, the missile was launched. It flew through the air without an issue, gliding perfectly. It flew through the portal, then the portal closed. The platform was slowly lowered back to the ground, disconnected from the helicopter. It was determined the city would be far enough away to make a quick observation from the heaven side of the portal. However, remembering what the flaming person presented, my heart dropped. I didn't want my comrades to be incinerated. I showed them the skeleton. I told them what happened. "What was his name?" asked my commander. "I wasn't told," I said, "but the fact we can't recognize them says enough. How will we know if we've succeeded?" I had enough with this. If this was where traveling through portals was going to take us, I might as well go back to my regular life, the one already full of near-death experiences. "I'll go take a look," I said. "If I don't come back out, we probably failed." I stepped up to the portal, expecting to be met with excruciating pain. I stopped, wanting to let my comrades know we won. I stepped through the portal. The first thing I saw was a huge mushroom cloud. The wind was still blowing from the explosion, but it had clearly died down by the time I arrived. 2 giant off-anims were lying still on the ground, burning up in flames. Their eyes were lifeless and gray. A third off-anim floated erratically through the air, left to right. It too was up in flames, but not as much as the other 2 were. The flames were definitely spreading, though. I smiled for the first time in months. The wild beasts were dying. As I looked up in relief, a flame caught my attention. 4 separate fires were spreading across the grass. Adrenaline rushed through me. The giant off-anim let out an echoing screech chilling enough to catch my full attention. I looked up and saw the colossal creature hurling towards me. My heart sped up. I leaped backwards through the portal, tripping and falling backwards into the snow. My comrades cheered. Despite the fact I was still alive, I was still in a panic. I got up on my feet and shouted at my commander, telling him to shut the portal. I explained what I had seen. Then everyone grit their teeth. The portal was then shut before any fires or off-anim debris could get through. Entry 21. I can finally start a new entry. I took a break from writing for a couple days. After the end of the war, the central government is going to cover up the loss of 1.5 million soldiers for the sake of not heightening tensions with the West. It's not something we would usually do, but the situation we went through was nothing usual. It was an incident we don't want to talk about. The mechanics are just too confusing. Entry 22. I never thought I'd pick up this journal again. Today is November 16, 1964. Minutes ago, I found a film in my basement that I didn't see yesterday. All set up and everything. The film was in color and began in a field of grass. In the distance was a forest. Further off in the distance was the skyline of a metropolis that lined up the horizon. Then there was a flash of light. The light dissipated, and in the distance was a growing mushroom cloud. The film ended with a total run time of 15 seconds. It was amazing to see the actual explosion. That was a major historical moment for them. The film came with a letter. This is what it read. Artem, thank you for assisting my people in the uprising. The new god in power has sealed off my reality from those entering with malicious intent, so I can let you know what I wanted you to know, but waited for the right time to tell you. I knew the right time would be any time after I received your help, as you would have likely taken criticism terribly. What I want you to know is, you and your fellow Soviets need to know torture is never okay. I'm not sure if you're guilty of it yourself, but if you are, please change your view on it. The Soviet Union is guilty of many of the things it criticizes. Sincerely, the one they call the devil. All I'll say is, I'm glad I started out as a draftkey rather than a blunt psychopath. I wonder how things are going in heaven, hell, and earth. Hopefully everyone's in a better place than they were before. So, Jerry, Dave said, licking his crusty lips as he prepared to devour the sandwich I'd bought him. What's up, buddy? I blubbered, bits of pastrami and rye tumbling to my feet. I have a question for you. Look, I know this is only like our 8th time meeting, but he trailed off, staring into the distance at nothing in particular. I waited expectantly for him to continue. A moment later, he glanced down to the tuna sub clutched in his dirty fingers, and a warm grin inched across his face. With a tiny nod, he continued, "This is coming way out of left field, but I'm getting married soon," he said, proudly showcasing a glimmering gold wedding band. "Dave, that's awesome. Congratulations, man. Who's the lucky lady?" His cheeks flushed with color, and he began twirling his greasy gray locks like a giddy schoolgirl. "Her name is Lucy. You'll get to meet her soon enough. I'll be honored. I'm glad you found yourself a good girl. I'm happy for you," I said, clasping Dave on the shoulder. I recoiled a bit too quickly at the gruff texture of his unwashed coat. "Thanks, Jerry. That means a lot. So, what I've been meaning to ask you is," he mumbled, wringing his hands and staring holes into his feet, "will you be my best man?" My jaw dropped to the floor as a wet glob of meat slapped the concrete. "Sorry for springing this on you, but honestly, you're one of the only people who's shown me kindness. Living on the streets, everyone looks at you like you're garbage, like the crap stain mucking up their fancy little porcelain toilet. But not you, Jerry. You're one of the most genuine people I've ever met. I know it's a lot to ask for, but it would mean the world to me." He gazed into my eyes, tears threatening to spill down his grungy cheeks. I fumbled for any excuse I could think of. "I'm going on a business trip that day. My elderly mother is ill. I have my pet rock's funeral to go to. Anything." The words that spilled from my mouth sent my head into a frenzy. "I'll do it." Why did I have to say that? Dave gingerly set his sub down on the bench before throwing his grimy arms around me. I struggled to choke back the vomit creeping up my throat as his putrid stench assaulted my nostrils. "Thank you so much, Jerry. I knew I could count on you." "Don't mention it," I wheezed, gulping lungfuls of brisk New York air like my life depended on it. "I'll meet up with you sometime this week to give you the details. I know where to find you," he said, stuffing the remainder of the sandwich into a tattered pocket. "Great, I'll mark my calendar." He turned to leave as my bus screeched to a halt before me. I stood to get on, a shiver rippling down my spine. It felt as if dozens of bed bugs were crawling throughout my coat. I made a mental note to burn it once I got home. As I boarded, I claimed my seat by the window. Dave stood on the pavement below. He mouthed a silent thank you as we lurched forward. "No, babe, I'm not saying I don't like the guy. What I mean is, we've met literally 4 times, and now he's asking me to be the freaking best man in his wedding. Don't you think that's a little strange?" Grace pursed her lips as she set a steaming plate of meatloaf and veggies before me. "I'll admit, it's kinda weird, but I think it's sweet too. Give the guy a chance. He drew the short end of the stick in life. Make his day and move on. So, when's the bachelor party?" she said, winking at me as she slid into her chair. "Beats me. The man didn't give me any details. All he said was, 'I know where to find you,' whatever that means. You see him every once in a while at the bus stop, right? I'm sure he'll meet you there when he's ready. You should ask him if you can have a +1. Grace giggled, grinning ear to ear. "I definitely will. I don't want to go through this stuff alone." I didn't see Dave for the rest of the week. Maybe he'd forgotten about me and asked someone else. I mean, he had to have some friends, right? As the days dredged on, I began to let my guard down. I gradually stopped glancing behind me everywhere I went. My eyes quit darting around wildly at the bus stop. The crowded streets felt more welcoming. Until the next Monday, I was minding my own business, just one of a plethora of downtrodden cubicle monkeys destined for yet another bland, monotonous day. I downed my 4th cup of coffee, rising to retrieve a 5th, when I heard the commotion. Ashley, the pretty blonde receptionist that all the company's bachelors swooned over, was marching furiously behind a disheveled man tracking dirt through our previously unsullied carpet. She screamed at him, tugging at his ratty clothes to no avail. My heart plummeted into my gut when I saw him. I was Dave. Sir, for the 15th time, you can't be in here. This is private property. Yeah, just give me a couple minutes. There's someone I came to see. I don't care who you came to see. You need to leave before I call the cops. Ashley's face was red as a face engine. I could practically see the steam wafting from her ears. I tried to duck out of view before Dave saw me. I plopped into my seat, praying the pair wouldn't find me. Of course, I wouldn't be so lucky. Dave cupped his grubby hands to his mouth and screamed into the sea of cubes. I'm looking for Jerry Marcetti. Does anyone know where Jerry Marcetti sits? At that moment, I wanted nothing more than to coil into a ball and die. My head began to spin, and I felt queasy. How the hell did Dave figure out where I worked? I started to lay my head down on my desk, when out of my periphery, I noticed Jared, the temp worker, discreetly pointing in my direction. I immediately snapped my head toward him and shot him a death glare. His face drained of color, and he reclaimed his seat. I could only pray that Dave hadn't seen. Hey, sure, there you are, buddy. Welp, that was pointless. Oh, hey Dave, what brings you to the office? I laughed nervously, my eyes pleading with Ashley to help me. She crossed her arms and turned her head, just passing through. And I thought now would be as good a time as any to give you this, he smirked, handing me a crumpled piece of notebook paper with scratchy, barely legible writing scrawled on it haphazardly in pencil. Oh, thanks. Don't mention it, pal. I can't tell you how delighted it makes me to have you as my best man. You're a true friend. Ashley's face twisted in confusion. I wanted to throw up. Great, now everyone and their second cousin knew about the wedding. Way to keep a secret, Dave. Yeah. Looking forward to it, I muttered, mentally shooting daggers at Dave's dirt-smeared forehead. But anyway, I won't hold you up any longer. I'm sure you have lots of planning to do. I'll walk you out, I insisted, scrambling to my feet. Ashley raised an eyebrow at me. Are you two done here? I need him out now, she seeped, icy blue eyes boring into mine. Yeah, sorry Ash. Won't happen again, will it, Dave? Nope, sorry for the disturbance, ma'am, he said, trundling out the front door, waving as he went. See you soon, Jerry. I pursed my lips and nodded as the glass door clinked shut. Pins and needles prickled my back as dozens of curious onlookers leered at me while I returned to my desk. God, why did he have to choose me? He showed up to my work for heaven's sake. Grace, what am I supposed to do? He literally screamed my name out in front of everyone. I'm lucky that Ted is on a business trip this week. Who knows how he'd react? My girlfriend sighed, rubbing the back on her neck. Yeah, that's really strange, babe. It's obvious that he's never heard of manners. Did you look over the note he left you? No, I've been too disgusted by the whole situation to even look at the thing. You can read it if you want, I said, sliding the paper across the table to her. All right, you're sure you don't mind me reading this? She asked, eyeing me inquisitively. I don't care, just get it over with, if you insist. Well, that's odd. I think you should take a look at this yourself, Grace said, handing the note back to me. I scanned Dave's chicken scratch, struggling to comprehend his awful writing. Meet me behind Brownsville First Baptist Church at 4:30 p.m. this Sunday. Come alone. My brows furrowed in confusion. I flipped the page, eyeballing it up and down, trying to find any details I may have missed. After a couple strenuous minutes of searching, I gave up. That's really weird. He didn't tell me what to wear, and the note mentions nothing about a reception or a recital, and I can't even bring a +1. What kind of wedding is this? Grace shrugged. No clue. Han, I guess you're just going to have to find out for yourself. I sighed heavily, realizing that she was right. My nerves ran wild as the day of the wedding quickly approached. Why did all of this have to be so shady? Why couldn't Dave just have a normal wedding like any other halfway functioning member of society? The whole thing left a bad taste in my mouth. Before I knew it, the day had finally arrived. I sported a sleek blue suit complete with a matching blazer and bow tie. I gave myself the once-over in my bathroom mirror as I prepared to leave, patting myself on the back for cleaning up so nicely. "You look very handsome, baby. Be careful and have fun. I'll be waiting for you when you get back," Grace said, planting a kiss on my cheek and firing a wink at me as I walked out the door. My heart fluttered. It always did around her. "I'll try my best. I love you," I said as my cheeks blossomed with color. "I love you too, babe." I trundled along the road in my worn Chevy Tahoe at a snail's pace, headed to the venue armed with nothing but my pride and $50 as a gift. Dave would probably appreciate that more than some cheap home decoration, right? Of course he would. He didn't have a home. I rolled to a stop in the near empty parking lot with 3 minutes to spare. I slipped out of the vehicle and hurriedly tromped to the back of the building, heart pounding against my chest like a sledgehammer. I wiped a bead of sweat from my brow as I rounded the corner, and there he was, in all his ragged glory. "Dave, you look great, buddy." He proudly wore a half-washed button-down with yellowing sweat stains visible in the pits and neck areas, along with frayed black trousers, brown wrinkled dress shoes, a shabby black belt, a stained green tie, and mismatched socks. "Thanks, man. I'm a nervous wreck. What if she gets cold feet? I mean, I can barely afford to feed myself most days. What if she realizes what a bum I am and backs out?" "Don't worry about that. You're a great guy. She wouldn't be marrying you if she didn't believe that. And this should help a little with your food problem," I said, sliding a crisp $50 bill into his uncharacteristically clean hand. He looked at the money, then back to me, grinning like a child on Christmas morning. "Thanks, Jerry. I knew I made the right choice picking you. Now let's hurry up and get in there. I have a girlfriend to marry." We shuffled in through the back door. Trepidation bubbled in my gut as we made our way through a small storage room and into the chapel. Dave paused, taking a deep breath as he prepared himself for the biggest moment of his life. "I almost forgot. Here's the rings. Thank you again for doing this. You're the best." I dropped them into my shirt pocket and nodded proudly as we entered the church. We found ourselves next to a small stage. Dozens of empty pews lined the worship hall like soldiers at attention. Rays of light beamed through the stained glass windows, casting beautiful shades of an amalgamation of colors across every surface. Standing before the podium, awaiting her fiancé's arrival, was Lucy. Stunning would be an understatement. Voluminous blonde curls bounced atop her shoulders, bobbing up and down with the slightest movement. Ocean blue eyes shimmered as they watched us make our way toward them. Lucy smiled at Dave, showcasing rows of flawless white teeth. Her wedding dress fit perfectly, hugging her petite frame in all the right places. I was gobsmacked. How did Dave manage to pull this goddess? We tentatively approached as an impatient pastor hurried us along. He began reading from a paper in a monotone voice as the bride and groom stared lovingly into each other's eyes. I zoned out, still struggling to comprehend the enigma that was Dave's life. He truly was a wonder. I was snapped from my trance by a nudge to the arm. "Jerry, the rings," Dave whispered, trying to discreetly get my attention. "Right, sorry," I mumbled as I handed him the diamond-encrusted silver bands. He turned back to his soon-to-be wife and gently scooped her hands into his. "Do you, what's your name again?" the pastor murmured into Dave's ear. "David Bowman." "Idiot." The pastor glared at him before continuing. "Do you, David Bowman, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, until death do you part?" "I do." "And do you, Lucille Johnston, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, from this day forward, until death do you part?" "I do." "And do the both of you take this man to be your unlawful prisoner, to beat, and to torture, to maim, and to torment, until death knocks down his door?" "We do." Suddenly, the trio faced me, each producing a dagger from somewhere on their person. They glowered at me menacingly, slowly stepping toward me like wolves stalking a rabbit. I backed away, heart threatening to burst from my chest. I slipped off the stage, toppling to the cold, unforgiving floor. My brain scrambled for something, anything, to help me escape my predicament. The three were quickly closing the distance. "Guys, come on. I'll help you. We can. Don't try to smooth talk your way out of this, Jerry. I've been waiting for this day for a long time," Dave said, hungrily licking his lips. He reached down and pulled me to my feet, knife at my back. "Well, my beautiful bride, ladies first." With pleasure, Lucy snarled, hovering her blade inches from my neck. I squeezed my eyes shut, readying myself for the searing pain that would surely come, but it never did. "Stop right there. You take your hands off my boyfriend right now, or I won't hesitate to blow your brains out, you ugly wench." I opened my eyes to see Grace pointing my Rock Island bolt-action rifle at Lucy's forehead. She released me, cautiously returning to her cohorts with her hands raised above her head. I scurried across the room to where my girlfriend stood, rifle firm in her grip. I'd never been so thankful to see her in my life. "Here's what's going to happen next. We're going to leave, and if I ever catch you anywhere near my baby again, I will ruthlessly hunt you down, and I won't hesitate to pull the trigger on every one of you slimy pieces of trash. Got it?" The guilty party timidly nodded as Grace rushed me out the door. We booked it to our cars and flew home. Once I got there, I threw my arms around my girlfriend and held her for a long time. Tears flowed down both our faces as the weight of our experience came toppling down on us. When we finally managed to compose ourselves, we called the cops, and they took our statements. A quick sweep of the chapel revealed a basement filled to the brim with an assortment of various medieval torture devices. Head crushers, lead sprinklers, giant crosses, and nails, you name it. I don't know what Dave had planned for me, but it wasn't good. Once the police were satisfied that we had told them the full story, I turned to Grace. I had a mental itch that I couldn't quite scratch. "Hey babe, I have a question. We've only been getting grilled for a couple hours, but I guess I have one more in me." She giggled sarcastically. "How did you know I was in danger?" I had a gut feeling. The whole thing felt off. "Why would he need you to come alone?" "I guess I just really wanted to be your plus one," she smirked. I couldn't help but chuckle. "Well, I'm glad you did," I said, giving her a peck on the cheek. That was 6 months ago. I proposed to Grace at the first opportunity to present itself. She's everything I could have asked for and then some. Our own wedding is set for 9 months from now. I must be the luckiest man alive. I've tried my best to move on from the events of that evening and focus on the present, but I still have trouble falling asleep at night. Please be vigilant and be wary of any random homeless people that mention a wedding, because Dave is still out there and he needs a new best man. I'm a horseman means I raise horses. Always have been, always will be. My granddaddy, he was a horseman too, as well as my father. My son Jeb, he's 6 years old. Once he's all grown up, he's gonna be a horseman. Don't know if I'm gonna live that long, but if Jeb has any sons, I'm gonna make damn sure they're horsemen too. Hell, if he has any daughters, I'll make them into horsewomen. Don't want no one thinking I got a problem with women. Nah, truth is I love em, even got married to one. Her name's Ingeborg, one of em Scandinavian names. Met her while I was over in Norway on business. See, I'm a stud milker, and a damn good one at that. Got a fine breed and stock of stallions back at the ranch. Maybe most of y'all ain't familiar with horses, but there are folks out there who care a whole lot about em. I like him for the beauty, the majesty, but for a lot of folk it's about the sport. They need a horse that can run quick, turn on a dime, and jump real high. If someone's trying to create the perfect running horse, they sure as hell ain't gonna pick the mommy and daddy all willy-nilly. No sorry, they're gonna be looking for a mommy and a daddy that meet their needs. Problem is, let's say you got the perfect mommy and daddy. Horse breeding, it's a real violent act. Maybe y'all know about that Mr. Hands feller. Real shame what happened to him. But that's the kind of reality you gotta deal with when you're trying to breed a horse. A mare, her hole ain't much larger than an adult man's. I'm not trying to get too explicit here, just wanna make it clear that you got a high risk of damage in the mare when you let a stallion run wild on the poor thing. So that's where I come in. I got a real gentle touch, been doing this stuff for decades. I get a call from some feller who wants to breed himself a good running horse, says he's got the mare right with him, and all he needs is a particular one of the stallions I keep on the ranch. Well, what I'll do is milk that stallion real good and then hand deliver the stuff I get to the client in question. Most people, they probably can't keep that stuff fresh for more than an hour or two. Thing is, my wife's real smart when it comes to freezing stuff. Cryogenics is what it's called. She's got all sorts of capsules and containers that she's made that'll keep the stuff good for, hell, weeks. Never taken me that long to reach the client, but if humans ever start living on the moon, and I've gotta make deliveries up there, well, that's already settled. Now, once I reach the client, it's up to them to administer the stuff to the mayor. Ain't my business, you know. I handle everything on the stallion side of things, and the rest is up to them. That's the way my life's been for a real long time. Would have been perfectly fine with milk and studs till the day I die. Sometimes, though, that just ain't the way things go. I guess it was around half a year ago that I noticed one of my stallions, Embrigo, was missing. Embrigo's a jumpin' horse, had a long and successful career in the jumpin' circuits. Hell, I've never seen a horse that can jump half as high as that stallion can. Sorry, I oughta use past tense when I talk about Embrigo. I didn't do too well in English class on account of my fascination with horses. I was just a lad. Guess in my head I figured if a horse don't need English, I don't neither. I was totally nonverbal till the age of 10. Anyway, so I go into Embrigo's stable to give him his morning feed, and I see that the damn horse ain't there. Well, I've had horses run on me plenty of times. Hell, sometimes I'll find him a mile away, walking around some feller's cornfield like that's right, where they're meant to be. Usually when that happens, though, I can track him. You know, following the hoof prints and all that stuff. In this case, though, there just weren't anything to go off. Like Embrigo just disappeared into thin air. Spent the whole day looking around for that horse, most of the next day too, but I couldn't find anything. Problem is, stallion like that's worth more than most fellers' houses. If the horse hadn't run off, must have been horse-napped, way I figured. So, I got the police involved. They couldn't turn up anything. Eventually, I just had to give up. Damn shame, it was. Don't think the world'll ever see another jumpin' horse like Embrigo. A bit later I got an order from a client, had a strong prancing mare, and wanted to try and pop out some prize winning show horses. A good show horse needs to be real smart. It's a whole different type of competition compared to the running and the jumping that most folk are familiar with. Well, I had the perfect stallion to go with that mare, a real horse genius named Svengali. Picked him up a few years back, was honestly blown away by how smart the thing was. I guess you could tell it from the way he walked. Weren't nothing like the other horses, more like a horse that had reached one of them states of nirvana the fellers in Asia talk about. Sometimes I'd see him prancing round his pasture, doing the kinds of routines he'd done as a show horse, like he was practicing them, or some stuff. Couldn't believe my goddamn eyes. Well, I gave Svengali a good milking, and hopped on a plane to Canada to go meet the client. Been to Canada a few times. Before that, never been impressed. Too many trees for a horseman like me. Well, I drop off the stuff and mosey my way back home. Figure that's that. Problem is, I get another call from the feller a few days later. Tells me his mare just up and died. Damn shame is what I said, but there ain't too much I can do. Feller starts begging me, says he's got another prancing mare that ain't as good as the last one, but still pretty good. Truth be told, I felt a little bad for the guy, so I decided to give him a discount. 5% seemed reasonable to me, but my wife managed to talk me up to 10%. Said the feller must have been in a real grieving state of mind, and the least I could do is give him a 2-digit discount. Well, my wife's a lot more sensible than me when it comes to most things that ain't related to horses, so I decided to go with whatever she thought was best. So I gave Svengali another milkin, and went up to Canada again. Milking a stallion twice in such a short span of time usually ain't good for the horse, but I knew Svengali could take it. If he weren't up to it, he would have refused to be milked. That's the kind of horse he is. Anyway, I go back to the ranch, and a few days later I get yet another call from the client. Seems this mare died too. This time he sounds a little riled up, though, at least as riled up as a Canadian feller can get. He says the stuff I gave him was poison. I say that's ridiculous. I got it right from the source. How dare a Canadian feller like you accuse me of killing your horse? Then he tells me he saved a little bit of the stuff I gave him. Send it in for testing. Results came out all screwed up. I say how so? He says the DNA don't match up, like the little squiggly things, and it don't all come from the same horse. I assure him that I ain't diluting the stuff in any manner, but I don't quite think the feller believes me. It ain't exactly a rare practice in my particular field, hate to admit, but it can kill a mare. and that just don't sit right with me. Can't say I really understand how it works, but maybe that's for the better. Horseman's gotta keep things simple if he don't wanna end up losing his mind in this screwed up world we live in. Well, had to retire Svengali after that. If he was squirting out pure poison, not much I could really do to resolve the situation. And when I say retire, I don't mean I shot the poor bastard, just wasn't milking him no more. Only put down one horse in my whole life, never had the heart to do it again. Anyway, things quieted down the next month or two, then I started having more problems. Studs started disappearing again. First it was a pullin' horse named Balder, then it was a running horse named Late for breakfast. Few days later it was another pullin' horse, Frito. By that point I had too many missing horse cases, and not enough time in the day to figure out what in the hell was going on. Then, one day when I went out to feed him, I noticed something strange with Svengali. My eyesight ain't what it used to be. Must have been why I didn't notice it sooner, but that old stud weren't looking quite like he used to no more. Hell, he weren't looking like no horse I'd ever seen before. Had a few extra eyes just popping out all willy-nilly round his head, and when he opened his mouth there were so many teeth in there that they looked to be trying to push each other out. His color weren't quite right either. Before he'd been tan all over, but now there was browns and blacks and grays mixed in everywhere. He looked to have put on some weight too, had what you'd probably describe as a beer gut, just on a horse. Thought to myself maybe the bastard found his way into the shed where I keep the horse food, but that sure as hell didn't explain the eyes or the teeth or any of the other stuff. I tried checking his vitals to make sure everything was working alright, but when I touched his skin felt like something was pulling at my fingers, and I got spooked real good. Well, situation was real messed up with that. Had the missing horses, and now I wasn't real sure what to do about Svengali. I guess most horsemen would have just put him down after seeing some stuff like that, but I ain't most horsemen. Don't mean that in a good way. Guess I already explained my whole thing with putting a horse down. Ended up flipping a coin on it. Heads, I let him live in peace. Tails, I put him out of his misery. Well, got tails. Figured I'd have Jeb do it. Have him build himself some character. Set things up in the stable all nice and funeral-like. Figure if I show some respect for Svengali, maybe God'll forgive me for killing one of his most beautiful creatures. So what I do is I hand Jeb the shotgun and tell him to aim it right between Svengali's eyes, the two that are meant to be there, at least. And then he pulls the trigger, and Svengali's head explodes into a mess of brains and blood and all that other stuff. One of the teeth hits me square in the jaw. Swore it knocked a couple of my own loose, but who knows. Jeb just drops the shotgun and starts crying his eyes out, the tears carving out a path in his face that's all covered in horse blood. I give him a pat on the head and tell him he did a damn good job and I'm proud of him, but I notice something ain't quite right. The horse's body's still standing there like he didn't just get his head blown off. Then there's this weird sound like grapes getting stomped, and something starts to emerge out of where Svengali's head used to be. First there's a mouth, then I see the nose holes, then there's a long snout, eyes, and finally some ears. The numbers of some of those things weren't quite what they should have been, but it was close enough to a horse's head that a fool who'd never seen a horse in person would have still recognized it as belonging to a horse. Well, Jeb up and faints when he sees that, so I gotta worry about getting him somewhere safe before I can even think about what in the hell's going on. So I take Jeb into the house and have my wife look after him, but when I go back out to the stable there's no trace of Svengali anywhere. By that point I figured, well, screw it. If that horse wants to run away, I'll let him run away. I got bigger problems to contend with anyhow. Got a client living in Japan. Put in multiple orders. That right there was enough to snap me out of the weird state of mind I was in. So I gots to work, did some milking, then I flew on over there. Was my first time in Japan. Terrain ain't too good for horses, but some folk try to make do. Guess they mostly use the horses for eating over there. I'm sure it ain't half bad, but considering my deep emotional connection with the horses, I just can't do it. Feels like I'm spitting in the face of God. Well, client weren't like that. Was more interested in the running type of horse than the eat. Maybe if he weren't Japanese we could have been good buddies. Did learn a couple of words of Japanese, though. Real interest in language. Got a good laugh out of every feller when I greeted them with konnichiwa, dude. When I got back to the States, wife had some real bad news for me. rest of the horses gone missing the night before, just like that. Felt like I was about to soil myself right then and there, but I held it in. Gotta maintain some semblance of dignity when you're the man of the house. Felt like a real fool. Only way something like that happens is horse napping. Shoulda installed cameras or some stuff all over the place. Guess it just sorta slipped my mind. Well, I'd never had problems with anything of the sort till Embrigo went missing, so I hope you can forgive me for not handling security properly. Folks round these parts are real kind, ain't the types to kidnap a feller's horses. Well, I spent the next week thinking about killing myself. Sure, the studs I'd lost were worth a whole lot of money, but more than that I felt like I'd lost my kid. Not Jeb, but a different kid, a horse kid. Guess that's the way most folk feel when something they love goes missing. Spend a lot of time just walking round the pastures, staring at the prints in the dirt where the horses been stepping before. Jeb tried cheering me up, but he's just a kid. He don't know what real suffering is. Anyhow, it was one of those days of passing round the pastures that I noticed something I hadn't noticed before, a set of hoof prints leading outside the fences. Well, more like 3 or 4 sets of hoof prints. Felt my heart jump up into a place where it ain't meant to be. Figured if I followed the trail I'd find something of some sort. So I mosey along, not trying to get my hopes up, but I'm a horseman at heart, so I can't really help but send a silent prayer up to God, begging him to put one of my studs at the end of that trail. Trail goes out through the fields, into the woods, out the woods, back into the woods, and then I find myself standing in front of something like a cave. I don't got a flashlight on me, so I head back to grab one. Take the shotgun too, just in case. Ain't too keen around caves, being the polar opposite of a pasture and all. So then I'm standing in front of the cave again, and I shine the flashlight inside. Don't see nothing, but the hoof prints clearly go into the cave, so I start stepping forward. It's dark as hell in there, but I can hear some kind of sound up ahead, some sort of heavy breathing. Sounds to me like a horse deep in slumber, something I've heard many times in my life, and I start getting all excited and whatnot. The closer I get, though, the less sure I am that I'm hearing what I think I'm hearing. Something's snoring, but maybe it ain't a horse. Then I hear it again, and I think, damn, maybe it really is a horse. I just don't know, so I keep walking. Then I see it lying there not too far ahead, still sleeping, and snoring like a babe. Except it ain't a babe, and it sure as hell ain't no horse, either. I lose my grip on the shotgun, and it falls on the ground, blasting a hole in the wall of the cave, and making a real loud sound. Well, that wakes the damn thing up, and as it stands I find it difficult to really get a good handle on what the hell I'm looking at. It's got the body parts of a horse, but none of them are arranged in the right order. One head's in the right place, but there are 3 others sticking out the back, and I swear I can see 8 or 9 legs just sticking out every which way. Except that ain't all. There are wings sticking out everywhere too. Tiny little wings like the ones you'd see on a bat or something like that. There's more, too. Tails and legs and ears and eyes and mouths. And none of it makes any goddamn sense, so I don't try to think about it too much. Just pick the shotgun back up and fire it off in the thing's general direction. That don't seem to do much sides piss it off, and it starts making these horrible sounds and scrambling towards me. I ain't never soiled my pants before, but I reckon I was pretty damn close to doing it right there. I start backing up and then shoot at its legs, and that seems to knock the thing down. Thing is, I feel like a damn fool cause I know I only got 1 shot left. Didn't think I was actually gonna use the shotgun, so I didn't care to bring any spare ammunition with me. Figure I gotta make my last shot count, so I step towards the thing while it's wriggling around on the ground. Assuming it's Svengali I'm looking at, I figure trying to shoot the head off ain't gonna work, so I aim where I think the heart's gonna be. Then I pull the trigger, and there's this huge explosion of horse and blood, and after I wipe off the flashlight it looks like the thing ain't moving no more. I just stand there for a while and stare at it, but no amount of staring makes me feel no better. It's still twitching all over, all the eyes and wings and ears, but it sure as hell don't got the strength to get up and chase after me no more. Sounds strange, but I can't help but tear up a little looking at it. Might not have been a horse no more, but it used to be one. Maybe more than one. So I decide I ought to give the thing a proper burial. So I head back home to grab the shovel. Dug a lot of horse graves in my time. It's a personal thing. That's why I don't use no machinery for it. Man and horse have been existing together longer than any damn machine has. Guess you could call it a sign of respect. Only thing is, the body ain't there when I go back to the cave. Whole place is covered in blood and pieces of horse, but I can't find no sign of the thing I'm looking for. Don't see no sign of where it could have went, neither, but that don't stop me from searching. Well, I don't come up with anything, so eventually, I gotta call it a day. Give my wife a big kiss when I get back home, and tell her I love her. Say the same thing to Jeb. Even a horseman's gotta have room in his heart for other fellers than himself. Sorry, the whole thing in the cave happened yesterday, and after I got home I thought I'd write something up since I figured maybe someone out there might be interested in hearing about it. I don't actually talk like that in real life. I guess you could say I was playing that part up. I'm actually a 5'1" Chinese American guy, not the usual type that runs a horse ranch. I suppose some part of me thought that nobody would want to hear a story from a horse rancher who wasn't a cowboy. Well, that's beside the point. I don't feel like it's appropriate to keep up the cowboy act. I woke up this morning to get Jeb ready for school, but he wasn't in his bedroom. He wasn't anywhere in the house, as far as I could tell. I only noticed that the front door was hanging open after I'd basically turned the entire place upside down. So, I thought that maybe Jeb had wandered out onto the ranch. A little out of character, but a possibility. I called out to him a few times, but didn't get any kind of response. Then, I heard a scream off in the distance, but it wasn't just a scream. There was an undertone to it, like the whinny of a frightened horse. There were other sounds, too, shrieks and caws and howls, all rolled together into that cry. Well, I think I know what's out there waiting for me, but I don't know if I'm ready to face it. Guess that's why I'm sitting here, writing this, instead of looking for my son. I've got the shotgun with me and I think I'm about to head out now. But I don't know if I'm going to be returning. Depends on what I find, I guess. When all's said and done, I might end up being more horse than man. Why the hell would y'all even want to go out there? My grandmother would say in that thick Texan drawl before spitting a wad of dip into her snuff mug. She was like a firecracker, always startling you with a pop even though you were the one who lit the match. My grandpa Joe, a towering man with callous mitts for hands, would grunt in assent and flip to the next page of his morning paper. I miss them. My brother Jesse and I are cleaning out their house after my grandmother passed, reminiscing on the mostly fond memories we shared. We were raised here, taken by our mother in the dead of night to flee the terrors of my drunken father. My father wouldn't find us in the vast countryside of Texas, and if he did stumble upon the needle in the haystack, he would have to answer to Big Joe, who preferred to settle disputes with his fists. My mom made the right call. Dad was never able to find us. Too many tiny towns, like the one we escaped to. But if there's anything I've learned, the most evil things can happen in the smallest places. My grandparents left us the house, reopening a chapter in our lives that we desperately wanted to keep closed. I put it on the market and received a quick and generous offer, but only for the land. The house would be demolished, and our memories would be buried under wood and rubble. I think we'd prefer it that way. Behind the house is the vast East Texas forest, but our neck of the woods is a little different. Most folks from other towns use their woods. They hike, fish, or even camp in the beautiful landscape that only a higher power could have created. We don't go in ours. There's a small trail where you can let your kids play, but soon it ends abruptly and you're staring at a long metal chain with a rusty sign, which firmly reads, "Keep out." No one really knows why the section of the forest is closed off. If you asked a city official, they'd say it's because the area is privately owned by a real estate developer, though no one can remember the company's name. There were rumors that several people went missing over the last 40 years because there are no trail markings, maintained paths, and that's why we're not allowed to explore. There were also whispers that a commune of Pentecostals resided deeper into the forest and that they valued privacy and the Second Amendment. The story is that the original church in town splintered back in the 1920s, and the other half set up their own community. Now this was actually true, and documented by parishioners of that time, but there's no evidence that the different factions retreated into the woods. It didn't stop rabble-rousers from claiming they had crossed the boundary and explored the other side. Stories were varied, but all came to the same conclusion. People were living in those woods. Some told stories of stumbling across makeshift shelters and tents surrounding a campfire. Others regaled tales of seeing shadowy figures dart behind trees in fear of seeing an outsider. Jesse and I were naturally curious and rambunctious, as most twin brothers could be. We scaled every inch of the trail, but reluctantly heeded our grandmother's warning of never venturing beyond the boundary. We were fascinated about what could be out there and discussed our theories before bed. Our friends were also outdoorsy, and our fascination with the uncharted territory soon became an obsession. "Well, why don't we just do it?" our friend Mikey said, while we shared a cigarette in the park. We looked at him quizzically. "We're about to start high school. Let's see what the damn fuss is about." Not seeing a reason not to, we devised a plan to trek the rest of our woods. It was me, Jesse, Mikey Byad, Wyatt Rhodes, and his older cousin Dewey, who had just received his Eagle Scout award. Dewey was odd, but we felt a trained outdoorsman was the best person to lead the expedition. We decided to leave around 7:30 p.m. as my grandparents would be asleep and my mom was still out of town for work. We'd get at least 1 hour of daylight before sunset to explore the forbidden green space. I remember feeling nervous as I laced my old hiking boots and carefully applied bug spray. We could hear Big Joe snoring in the other room, and Jesse and I snuck out the kitchen door and galloped toward Mikey's house. We were the last to arrive. Dewey was messing with his compass in his full Eagle Scout uniform, while Wyatt and Mikey pensively shared another cigarette. We set off, gliding through the mile-long trail that led to the other side. The sun had shifted to a blood-orange hue, and we were surprised to see dark clouds loom overhead. Dewey said, shifting his thick round glasses. "The weatherman didn't say there would be rain today." "Of course you watch the weather," Wyatt said, rolling his eyes, while Mikey and I muffled our snickers. "Do we turn back?" Jesse asked, before I reminded him that this might be our only chance. "Mom would be back in town next weekend. I ain't afraid of no rain," Mikey declared. The rest of us agreed and soldiered onto the rusty sign, stepping over it with ease. Jesse crossed last, and like clockwork, rain began to putter down from the sky. It was a light summer rain, hot to the touch and more pungent. None of us were particularly concerned until we heard a rumbling that sounded like thunder. I could tell Dewey was nervous, moving away from the tall southern oaks whose branches looked like arms trying to grab you. The sun was now entirely invisible, and we would not see it again until tomorrow. A feeling of unease loomed over us. It was hard to describe the other side. It looked exactly like any other part of the woods, but it felt odd. The trail leading up was teeming with the sounds of nature, from birds or other woodland creatures, but this part of the forest was silent, minus the rain. I kept looking over my shoulder as I swore I could see shadows darting in and out of my peripheral vision. Holy hell, Dewey stopped us. "Look," in the distance was what looked like a church spire, though it was decayed with large chunks of wood missing. It was enormous and stared back at us over the tree line. "Looks like there was a church after all," Jesse said. "We should probably go," Dewey responded with his voice quivering. "They said those folks have guns." "Oh yeah, well, check this out," Mikey said while pulling out a gleaming silver pistol from his backpack. "Nabbed this from my dad's closet. I'll show them this if they try and mess with us." We all immediately began arguing and cursing at Mikey for doing something so reckless. Wyatt started to turn back, but something made him stop in his tracks. We looked in his direction and saw something at the top of a hill. It was a man, or at least it looked like a man. I couldn't really make out his face, though it appeared to sag and stare at us in a slack-jawed gaze. Mikey, the idiot he was, flashed his gun at the strange figure. The man seemed to glance at the weapon and sauntered back behind the hill, out of sight. Mikey smirked, "Take that." But to our horror, the man reappeared and charged toward us, tumbling down the hill while moaning from his open mouth. As he got closer, I saw that he was missing an eye. Mikey fired the pistol, but the shot was so loud that he dropped it in shock. The man barreled into us and knocked down Mikey while grunting and screaming from his mouth, wailing his arms on Mikey's body like a prehistoric primate. Dewey picked up his walking stick and smacked the man in the face before we darted deeper into the forest. My ears were still ringing when we collapsed in exhaustion in an unknown clearing. The tall spire was closer, and torrential rain slammed down on us. "You're an idiot, Mikey," Wyatt sputtered, digging his knuckles into the soaked earth. We all stood up to brush ourselves off, eager to return home. But there was one issue. Dewey was missing. We started to panic, screaming for Dewey's name into what seemed like the void. Dewey had everything we needed to get out of there in his backpack. Now we were alone, shivering, and unable to see far ahead of us. After finding our way for a bit, we heard whistling. I didn't know the tune back then, but now I know it was in the Hall of the Mountain King. The whistling echoed loudly through the forest, and we noticed it was coming directly from the spire. We followed the melody until we reached the bushes to the spire's entrance. The spire was not connected to any building, and it looked like it had been moved by a crane. And onto the ground, a makeshift doorway was cut at the bottom. We could hear muttering and banging from inside the tower. Lightning lit up the room behind the entrance. There was a silhouette of a large man in the entryway. His back was turned to us, but it became clear it wasn't the man who attacked us earlier. The man, whistling his tune, then walked around back with something slumped over his shoulder, revealing a tied-up Dewey with terror in his eyes. We crept toward the spire and tried to untie Dewey, but the knots were too thick. And Jesse and I quit the Scouts after 3rd grade. I remember the smell being terrible, like rotten eggs and spoiled meat. Mikey found a table saw nearby and began furiously cutting the ropes until we freed Dewey. "We have to go now," he screamed, and we tumbled out of the spire, only to be greeted by the massive man from earlier. He was wearing a full rain suit, and an old welder's mask was on the top of his head. I remember him chuckling and then whistling like my grandpa did when it was time for supper. The floodlight from the top of the entrance lit up. I looked around and saw various heads pop out from under the bushes, each with their faces contorted in either rage or horror. There must have been a dozen figures, but I'm not sure I would call them human. The beast leapt toward us, and Jesse helped me to my feet as we barreled through the trees. The sound of screaming and agonizing groans followed us, and I was too scared to even look back, but heard the shuffling of legs chasing after me. We kept running until Dewey tripped over the chain boundary. The rest of us toppled over him with wet mud painting our faces. I whipped around and saw the reflections of a dozen eyes before they turned around and went back into the forest. We stayed on the ground for at least an hour, hyperventilating and cussing. I sat up when my heart rate finally slowed down and asked just what the hell had happened. Dewey, still exhausted, sputtered out what he saw. After hitting the man with his walking stick, an unknown figure grabbed Dewey, who put a funny smelling cloth over his face, and he went unconscious. When he came to, he was tied to a metal pole and was staring at a wooden table with what looked like a mannequin lying on it. But Dewey soon realized it was a body. The figure returned and began muttering a language Dewey didn't understand. A flash of lightning hit the top of the spire and traveled down a wire to the table, causing the body to jolt and convulse before going silent. The man shook his head and left, and we came in to untie Dewey. We said nothing, Jesse and I didn't leave the house for almost a week until our mother returned from her work trip. We then uneventfully began the school year, never venturing to the other side, except for Dewey. Dewey graduated from high school that year near the top of his class. I expected him to end up at Texas University or UT Austin, but instead, he disappeared. Some folks claimed to see him at local dives, chatting with itinerant strangers, or spending most of his time on the trails. While smoking a joint by myself on the trail one night, I thought I saw Dewey slip behind the rusted chain and cross into the forest. Curious as to what he was up to, I followed him. I kept my distance, but Dewey walked forward purposefully, not bothering to even look down at his shoe. Even though I was a little stoned, it didn't take long to realize where he was headed. The spire soon came into view, and Dewey slipped behind some bushes. I knelt down to look and saw him dragging trash bags into the tower's entrance. Following him was the gargantuan man with the welder's mask we saw last summer. I ran as fast as I could back home. In the morning, my grandparents found several dead birds neatly aligned on their porch. They blamed our cat, Archie, but it felt like a warning to me. I was never going back to those woods ever again. Until last night, while blowing off some steam with Jesse, we ran into our old pal Wyatt. After shooting the breeze, I asked if Wyatt had heard from cousin Dewey. Wyatt grimaced and shook his head. Turned into a recluse after y'all left for college. did some time in county lockup for trespassing at the local cemetery around 10 years ago. Haven't seen him since. Jesse smirked. He always was an oddball, wasn't he? Wonder what he's up to now. I had a feeling. That night, I couldn't sleep, tossing and turning until I had a horrifying realization. Our grandmother was laid to rest in that cemetery. The ground was probably still fresh under her headstone. I flew back to my grandparents' house from our motel in my truck. I tore into the old shed and took the carbine Grandpa Joe kept from his time in Vietnam. I ensured it was clean and set off on the trail, soon reaching the rusted chain boundary. I crossed the other side, feeling like I was stepping into a new dimension. The forest went silent, seeming untouched from when we were children. I carefully made my way toward the spire, gripping my grandfather's gun, until my knuckles turned white. I think I hear faint whistling in the distance. I know I am being watched. I know I am being followed. I'm in college. Last night, I played the most disturbing game of Never Have I Ever with my roommates. If you don't know the game, it goes like this. Everyone holds up 5 fingers. You go around the room, saying never have I ever, followed by something you've never done. Everyone who's done that thing has to put a finger down. 5 fingers down, and you lose. Anyway, last night we'd been drinking a bit, and a lot of juicy secret sharing was going on. We'd learned Tina and Layla had been skinny dipping. I'd cheated on a test, and now Layla had been in a threesome. You had a threesome. Aaron gasped. Who was it? She doesn't have to tell. That's not part of the rules, Tina said. But, Aaron pouted. Okay, fine. My turn. Never have I ever had sex outside. You know, if you keep doing sex once, I'm going to lose in like 2 seconds, Layla said, adjusting her glasses. Okay, I'll do something different, Tina said. She leaned in closer and lowered her voice to an almost whisper. Never have I ever seen someone die. An uneasy silence settled over us. Our smiles faded, and we glanced at each other. Then Aaron and I each put our fingers down. Going with the creepy theme here, Layla said, never have I ever used a Ouija board. Aaron and I put our fingers down again. It had been back in September, shortly after that girl, Lucy, disappeared. 1 year above us, majoring in art history. Looking back on it, it wasn't the most respectful thing to do. She was dead, probably, and here we were making some spooky thing out of it. Although, not to shift blame, but it really was Aaron's idea. Your turn, Layla said. Right, okay. My throat was dry. I reached over and took a sip of my grasshopper. Never have I ever smoked pot. Then it was Aaron's turn. She spun off mine, saying she'd never smoked a cigarette. And then we were back to Tina. For a second, she didn't say anything. We all stared at her, and she stared back, her eyes nearly black in the dim light. She was smiling, slightly, as she looked at all of us, hesitating, ramping up the tension. Never have I ever killed someone. Dead silence. Then Layla finally spoke, forcing a laugh. What the hell? She asked, crossing her tattooed arms over her chest. Of course none of us have ever. She stopped mid-sentence, and then she pointed at Aaron. Phew, you had 3 fingers up before, she said, her voice weak. Smell. I looked at Aaron. She sat there, stone-faced, holding up her pinky and ring fingers. She surveyed Layla with her cold blue eyes, then shook her head. No, I didn't. You totally did. Did you kill someone? Aaron narrowed her eyes. If I did, do you really think I'd be stupid enough to put down a finger? Tina and I glanced at each other, eyes wide. Layla, I finally cut in, unsure she had 3 fingers up before. You sure? You saw her? No, I didn't see her, but I mean, obviously, she didn't kill anyone. Layla focused back on Aaron. He put 1 down for the Ouija board, and 1 for seeing someone die. What was the 3rd one for? Skinny dipping, she replied, without hesitating. No, wait, Tina cut in. That doesn't make sense. You said you don't know how to swim. That's why you wouldn't come with us to Lake Crystal. So, you can skinny dip without swimming. That's why it's called skinny dipping, not skinny swimming. But I could hear it in her voice. She was getting flustered. My stomach twisted, and my heart began to pound. No, there's no way, is there? There was no way Aaron killed someone. And even if she had, there was no way she'd admit it in a game of Never Have I Ever. The whole thing was ridiculous. But then why is she acting so weird? Why isn't she just laughing it off? My hands were shaking now. I looked at Layla and Tina, and they both looked just as terrified as I was. Maybe she did kill someone. Maybe something was bothering me, nagging at the back of my mind, something I thought was insignificant when it happened, but now seemed very significant. I don't want to play anymore, Erin said abruptly. She got up off the floor and set her drink down on the table. You guys are being too weird. She started down the hallway where her and my bedrooms lay. Wait, I stood up. She slowly turned around. What, Caroline? She asked, her eyes empty. You going to accuse me of murder too? No, just, where were you that night? The night Lucy went missing. Excuse me, she spat. The gears were turning in my head. Before, I hadn't put the pieces together. It wasn't weird for Erin to be out that night. I'd been out all night, at Jared's place, or at a party, and so had Tina and Layla. And yet, it wasn't a weekend night. It was just a random Wednesday, around 2 a.m., when I heard Erin's door creak open next to mine. Heard her footsteps thumping down the hall. I'd woken again with a start around 4 a.m. to hear her coming home. Later that day, we'd heard Lucy was missing. Where were you? I asked. Again, I heard you leave. Around 2 a.m. it was the night she went missing. Erin's expression blanked. Then, in an instant, she ran down the hallway. She pushed me aside, roughly, and I fell to the floor. My head made a sickening thwack as it hit the floor. Distantly, I heard the other girls scream. Above me, I saw the door swing open, and then slam shut. I scrambled up, but it was too late. By the time I peered into the hallway, she was already gone. No one has found Erin yet. I don't know what happened to Lucy, and I don't even know if she's guilty, but I wonder if she didn't actually mean to put her finger down during our game. If maybe she did it without thinking, on instinct, or if maybe something unseen forced her finger down. My grandfather, Edgar Eddie Horse, passed away in early February. This was a man who inspired me my whole life and encouraged me to pursue whatever whims I was passionate about. When I wanted to be an astronaut, he sent me to space camp. When I wanted to be a soccer player, he got me my first pair of cleats. So years later, when I wanted to get into aerospace engineering, there was no question about it. He was there to help. He knew I'd eventually find my way, and that the best thing to do was to encourage me to try and to push myself further. I found great success in my work, and I've always been grateful to Eddie for his ceaseless enthusiasm. So when I heard about his suddenly deteriorating health, I dropped everything. When you get to your 80s, things can change at the drop of a hat. There is nothing more terrifying than the human condition, but the story I'm about to tell you comes close. I took care of Eddie those last few weeks of his life. We wanted him to be able to spend that time at home with friends and family, and we did whatever we could to make that happen. But Eddie had plans. He didn't want to spend time at home. He wanted to travel one last time. He had this strange idea to go to this little town in South Dakota. I couldn't figure out why, but he was determined. He got this strange shimmer in his eyes whenever he spoke about it. I gotta go, he said. Please, I just gotta go. It was a small town northeast of Rapid City. You could barely see it on a map. You could see the houses, but there's no name to it. That's how I got to know about Locust, South Dakota. Eddie died 2 weeks ahead of his planned trip to Locust. His passing was sudden, devastating, and confusing. I'd never heard him talk of that place before, and there was no real explanation as to why he wanted to go there. So I decided, as a final show of gratitude, to spread his ashes there. I made a reservation at a motel and drove out there over the weekend. There was no information about the motel I was staying at, what the buildings in the town were used for, or who lived there. It was a whole town of question marks, not because of anything being hidden, but because no one cared to look closer. This was the kind of town that was just a bunch of houses by the side of the road. The kind of place you pass by, only ever asking yourself who would live in a place like that to begin with. But when the time came, I carefully packed Eddie's bronze urn and took to the road, not knowing what to expect. I'd never been to South Dakota before. On my first day driving through Rapid City, there was this violent snowfall that almost threw me off the road. Going up to Locust was about as flat a terrain as it gets, these endless fields of snow stretching for miles. Not that you could see that far because of the weather, but still, that first night in Locust wasn't anything special. I arrived pretty late, got myself a gas station hot dog from across the street, and crashed in my room. The owner seemed nice enough, a soft-spoken elderly woman called Dottie, who was eager to make sure I had everything I needed for my stay. I crawled into bed, watched some TV, and fell asleep. I left Eddie's urn out. He loved watching late-night television. I figured he'd appreciate me leaving it on. The weather had cleared up by morning. The sun reflecting off the fresh snow was blinding, and there was this awkward humidity in the air. It was still cold, but wearing a jacket made me feel sticky, like a warm ham in a plastic bag. Awful. I brought my backpack, taking Eddie along. I was gonna check out the town, ask a few questions, and try to figure out why my grandpa wanted to go here so badly. Dottie, the owner, was up early. She asked me all about my plans, if I'd slept alright, if the water pressure in the shower was okay. I got the impression that she didn't see a lot of new people. I'm actually here for my grandpa, I said. Before I got the chance to elaborate, Dottie lit up like a candle, her smile growing wide and a laugh bubbling up. How exciting, she said. Wait, don't tell me you're Donnie's boy, right? Or is it Hector? No, sorry, I wasn't clear. Like Grandpa never made it here. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, she sighed. I'm sure he would have loved our little town. It's strange, I said. I don't think he's ever been here. Why he'd be so eager to visit. None of us have been to heaven neither, she smiled. But we can still wish to see it. She laughed it off and took me to a small dining room. Fresh bacon, eggs, and coffee. A little slice of heaven right there. Dottie had a few other guests that morning. An old couple and a woman in a wheelchair. Just people from the neighborhood, it seemed. The woman in the wheelchair had an oxygen tank and a white mask covering half her face, which she carefully removed to put tiny pieces of pancake in her mouth. She winced with every bite. I first mistook her for an older woman, but on closer inspection, she was close to my age. I was seated straight across from her, at an opposite table. Dottie sat down with me halfway through my breakfast, under the guise of offering me a refill for my coffee. I'm so sorry about your grandfather, she said. Was it sudden? It was his time, I nodded. We just thought he had a little more left. Terrible, Dottie sighed, shaking her head. But the Lord knows when our time is due. Yeah, well, Eddie wasn't really a good friend of the church. Nonsense. We're all friends here. As she left the table, I found myself staring into the eyes of the woman at the opposite table. A thin gray membrane covered her eyes as the machine pumped air into her lungs. But there, deep inside her dying orbs, was a strange shimmer, something I recognized from the many hours I'd spent with my grandfather. She knew something. She'd seen something. I went back up to my room to get my things. I got Eddie's urn, put it in my backpack, and double-checked my email. I still had a life to attend to, even if I'd taken some time off for Eddie's sake. There were meetings being planned, Zoom calls to attend, never-ending spreadsheets. I was in a different headspace, thinking about the practicalities. So when I came face to face with the elderly couple I'd seen downstairs, my mind sort of blanked. They were standing literally outside my door, about to knock. They seemed just as surprised as I was. Oh, hi, the old man said. Haven't seen you around before. Can I help you? I asked. We heard you talking to, Dottie, the man continued. About your grandfather. All right. Yeah, he passed. Recently, the two of them nodded and looked at one another. There's someone you ought to talk to. Not knowing what to expect, I agreed to come along. They seemed harmless enough, and I didn't know where to begin with this town. Not that there was much to see. We took a long walk to the east side of the town, past the gas station and supermarket. I could see the town church in the distance, blending into the white of the snow. The cemetery was on the other side of a hill. There were a few houses lining this side of town, and at the far end of the road was a mansion made of eggshell white brick. There was a red mailbox with the name Saffron printed in large letters. Walking up to the door, an older man stepped out to greet us. He looked to be in his early 70s. He had a full head of long hair, a bright white and fully starched shirt, and a prominent golden cross necklace. The couple introduced me to him. This is Joel, they said. I'm sure he can straighten things out. I shook his hand, and we looked at one another for a few seconds in complete silence. Finally, I gave him my name. I'm so thankful for you to be here, he smiled. I'm sure you have many questions. Joel invited me into his home. The couple asked me to have a blessed day and disappeared into the bright winter sun. Joel offered me a glass of water and sat me down by the kitchen table. He had a spotless house except for some dead bugs in the windowsill, but everything had this slight smell of either detergent or chemical lemon. There was also a slight reverb to everything I did and said. I showed Joel my grandfather's urn and explained what happened. I told him about this mysterious obsession with the town and this absolute determination to see it before his passing. Joel just looked at me, nodding. He was very easy to talk to, and he was eager to ask follow-up questions. Finally, he took the urn gently and looked at it. I was in a similar predicament, he said, but the good Lord decided to keep me around for a few more years. Praise be. So what was it that drove you here? I asked. Why this place? Joel thought about it as he carefully put the urn down. He cleaned it with a napkin. I raised a lot of horses back on my ranch in Minnesota, he said. Beautiful place. Had these fields of sunflowers with the same color as the sky, looking out on hazy mornings. As the sun rose, you might think you're looking into heaven, but with horses grazing on the clouds, I smiled. Joel grinned. He patted me on the shoulder, nodding enthusiastically. I like that. Yes, like horses grazing on the clouds above. What a glorious view. He turned in his seat, looking over at the urn, and lowered his voice. Slowly, his smile faded. But horses have this amazing ability, he said. They know when their time is over. They know when it is time for them to leave us behind and begin their journey to the pale beyond. They leave the comfort of their friends and family, walk into the field, and die, facing the sun as they fade. I never knew that. You won't see that on your phone. Gotta talk to a rancher to know these things. Joel smiled, tapping the side of his temple. But they know, and so many other animals do too. They don't contemplate what has been or what will be. They just know what must be done, and they do it. Joel got up and showed me around. He had this spacious living room with a large cross covering an entire section of the wall. It looked hand-carved, as from a single piece of wood. The people are blessed with the gift of foresight, a gift to perceive things that haven't been, to remember things that happened not to us, but to our forefathers. We imagine, we empathize, and when our time comes, we are so conflicted with what has been and what will be that we don't look to what currently is. Isn't that, mindfulness? That idea of, yes, Joel interrupted, of perceiving and living in the now. To so many of us, that just cannot be. Instead, we are filled with this terrible dread, this awful, hysterical fear of not knowing. Joel took a step towards me, looking at Eddie's urn, but passing away is as easy as breathing, and I choose to believe in a world where we do not need to fear what comes naturally. Why should we fear dying any more than we fear being born or falling in love? Joel carefully took Eddie's urn from me, placing it on a coffee table in front of the large cross. He looked up. Sometimes people find that peace within themselves. They find that moment where they know their time is coming, and those people, much like my horses, find themselves drawn away from friends and family to a place where they're supposed to be, and that place is here. That is it, right here. This is the place. This is where people go to die. Not all people, mind you, smiled Joel, but yes, many are drawn here, and when their time comes, this is where they choose to leave the world behind. Joel looked up at the cross, his eyes shimmering, admiring the rising sun, grazing on a cloud of their own, ready to take their place among God's little wheat. I spent the afternoon with Joel, listening to his ideas and his story. Turns out he had a condition where his brain could suffer a sudden aneurysm. He lived, as he described it, on a constant balance of life and death, where he could drop dead at any second. And in that state of living, everything in the world pulled him to this place. And time, Locust, South Dakota. He showed me a few articles about the town. The earliest mentions of it were from the 1910s, when they built the church. The cemetery was built on top of a drained lake. There were little articles mentioning the town in passing, but it was just fluff pieces. Anniversaries, weddings, church events. The first real headline came in the 60s, during the cult craze, but it sort of faded over time. People were looking closely at all off-the-map gatherings, but most agreed that the town of Locust were just peculiar, not heretical. But there was this one picture that I couldn't get out of my mind. This article from the 70s, where I could see dozens of people standing in a field, raising their arms to the sky in unison. They looked like scarecrows. Records speak of about 10 to 30 people traveling to Locust every year or so just to pass away. Most come from surrounding counties, but a few came all the way from Canada or northern Mexico. Joel told me about this one man who traveled all the way from Germany just to drop dead the moment he stepped inside the city limits. Later that day, we wandered back to the motel. Joel offered to treat me to one of Dottie's home-cooked meals. On the way there, I asked him a question that seemed obvious in hindsight. So why is this town called Locust? Some consider it a misheard Latin word, akos, meaning warm. I think it's a bit more complicated. Then, what do you think? Joel let the words sink in as he looked up at the sky. The sun had already set and the stars were coming out. He spoke and locusts came. Young locusts, without number, said Joel. I love that verse. It reminds me that it is the word of God that brings the locust. But in order for them to be brought, one has to listen. To hear the word of God, the locust had to hear it spoken. But the locust can't listen. I'm sorry, but that hardly makes any sense. Don't you see? Joel smiled. We are the locust. How else could we hear the word? How else could we be brought? That's an interpretation. I believe it to be a synonym of sorts, a word meaning a sin or sinful person. And at this, the town of Locust is the place where one leaves their sin behind as we move beyond. Sitting down to eat with Joel and Dottie, I got the impression that this man was loved all throughout the town. He was well-spoken, generous, and intensely friendly. The only one who didn't seem to warm up to his presence was the woman in the wheelchair with the oxygen tank, who seemed to shy away from everyone. I could see that twinkle in her eye still. Maybe that's the look you get when you know your time is up. I spent the rest of the day in the company of Joel and Dottie. We had a long talk about the town's history and the various people who'd passed through over the years. Apparently, most people who died there were cremated, as the nearby graveyard had been full for years. So seeing that I brought Eddie in an urn was fitting. Somehow, Joel had already bought an urn for himself. He had no living relatives to care for his remains, so he didn't want to inconvenience anyone with having to pay for one. But at the end of the evening, as I walked under the starry sky with Joel and contemplated things that would come to be, I felt something, a little tug in my chest. This tiny strand, leading directly from my heart to the fields of Locust. I was feeling it. That distant pull. Was I, too, about to die? What was supposed to be a weekend trip ended up being an entire week. I took time off to just get in touch with myself. I couldn't bring myself to say goodbye to Eddie yet. I'd do that on my last day. Instead, I spent my time getting to know the people of the town. Garland and Hannah, the elderly couple who'd introduced me to Joel. An older woman named Margaret, who idolized her late husband to a degree where she kept a shrine. There was Massid, who'd come all the way from Atlanta after he got his lung cancer diagnosis. There were about a dozen others that I noticed in passing, only getting to know them by name. But most of my days, I spent listening to Joel. While I didn't care much for his impromptu sermons, I could appreciate his positive tone. It was comforting, in a way, knowing something benevolent wanted me to be here at such a trying time. But the woman in the wheelchair never warmed up to me, or Joel. I learned that her name was Erin, and that she had about a dozen chronic health issues. She was one of few locals who'd been born and raised in Locust, as if she was never meant to leave. From all the people I talked to, no one had anything good to say about her. At best, they ignored her. Strange girl, Dottie said once. She has wanted to leave this town for years, but her body couldn't take it, so she just sits and waits. Out of all people, one would think she would want to be here. One morning, as Dottie had gone to get more bacon, I found myself alone with Erin in the dining room. As she removed her mask to place a piece of pancake in her mouth, I moved over to her table. She barely noticed. Once she did, she coughed. This awful, wheezing rattle. I introduced myself and asked if she wanted any help. No, she wheezed. I'm fine. I heard you're not quite the fan of this town as most others, I said. Is that right? Right, she said, steeling herself for another shot at her pancake. Screw this town. Seems alright to me, I shrugged. What's so bad about it? She gave me this long look, as if trying to figure out if I trained to be this dumb, or if I was a natural talent. Finally, she shook her head. God doesn't live in a field, she said. Whatever the hell these people are praying to, it ain't divine. She had a point. Most people praised the town as some sort of holy ground, that it was special, that it was this magical place where people were supposed to be at the end of their life, that it was something beautiful and spiritual, but for people like Aaron, who just wanted to live, it was a cruel taunt. When your entire life revolves around your death, you start to curse being born, and the more I thought about it, the more that knot in my chest tightened. It didn't feel like a calling anymore, it felt like a trap, like a spider pulling me in, rather than a guiding light leading the way. I empathized with Erin. If that was how she felt all the time, there was no wonder she resented that town. I decided to cut my extended visit short. I checked out the next morning, a few days ahead of what I'd paid for. Dottie didn't understand and was eager to clear up whatever problem I'd encountered. I tried explaining that my time there was over and that I had to return to my own life. Dottie seemed crushed, as if she couldn't understand why anyone would want to leave. This was, after all, the place where we all would end up eventually. Why leave? Why not just get comfortable? Still, I got in my car. Dottie protested as I backed out of the driveway and broke the speed limit on my way out. I could imagine Erin smiling for the first time in years, knowing I'd left town because of her. But that tug in my chest grew stronger, insistent. My pulse rose as my body was trying to figure out why I was going the wrong way, like diving deeper when I needed to come up for air. I kept coming back to the same thought over and over. If this was the end station, why leave? Why not just stay and face my maker, to shed my sin, my locust, and rest pure in this perfect little town? I had to pull over. My pulse was going crazy and I clutched my chest. It ached, sending red strands of pain pulsing through my arms. I closed my eyes to keep the tears in. Then I got a text. It was from Dottie. Apparently, I'd forgotten my grandfather's ashes. I came rolling back to the motel like a shamed dog. There was a whole bunch of people waiting for me in the parking lot. Joel was there, holding Eddie's bronze urn. They all looked at me with nothing but joy on their faces, like a lamb returning to the herd. They wanted me here. They wanted me to belong. And damn it all, there was an intense relief being back. I parked and got out. Joel placed the urn on the roof of my car and wrapped me up in a big hug. The others awed and nude. "We're gonna miss you," Joel said. "Are you sure you have to leave?" "I have to do what I came here for," I said. "Eddie wanted to be here, not me." "Then I suppose we ought to get to church," smiled Joel. "What better place to lay to rest?" Eddie wasn't a big church guy. "Then maybe the hill overlooking the graveyard," added Dottie. "It's beautiful up there." I thought about it. It wasn't quite the picture I imagined in my head when thinking about Eddie, but if that was what he wanted, that's what he'd get. "It is never too late," said Joel. "Not for him, not for you. If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away, and look, new things have come." Corinthians, added Garland. Praise be. We made our way through town, picking up more people as we went along. It was another beautiful, sunny day. The snow had started to melt in places, making the slush sink into my shoes. Some of those coming along had started singing psalms. Joel, on the other hand, seemed only to want to help. "Excuse them," he whispered. "They're just eager to see someone joining our congregation." "I'm not joining you," I said. "I know," nodded Joel, "but he is." He tapped the side of Eddie's urn, and I got this sinking feeling, like I was doing something terrible. I couldn't help but to think of what Aaron had said. God doesn't live in a field, so what the hell were we about to do, and for whom? We made our way off the road, continuing across a mushy field of melting snow. The others were singing, loudly and proudly, making the iron ball in my gullet grow. I felt sick. Still, part of me felt like this was the right place to be. But it felt right in an almost artificial sense, the same way a hot plate of French fries can be the best thing in the world. But you wouldn't want that forever. We finally got to the hill overlooking the church. There was this one big juniper tree casting some warning shade on us as I saw this vast clutter of tombstones below. For a town this small, the graveyard was enormous. A modest church was dwarfed next to it. As I took hold of the urn, I wanted to let Eddie go and be done with it. I wanted to do this and just leave, never looking back. I could live my life ignoring the pull to come back. That wouldn't be a problem. At least I hoped so. But at that moment, I was struggling to keep calm. Then, Joel grabbed me by the arm. "Let's take a closer look at the cemetery," he said. "Maybe you'll change your mind." I don't think I will, Joel. The walk never hurt anyone. He smiled. You got legs. Use them. He took me down to the cemetery, as the others were singing to the full extent of their hearts. Even Dottie had joined in, her usually quiet voice booming with certainty. Joel led me by the arm, weaving through the tombstones. Then, suddenly, he stopped. He raised a hand. Can you feel it? He asked. Can you feel this place? I don't know what to feel. I couldn't tell him the truth. I felt ill, like my body was revolting. I cursed Aaron for putting that thought in my head, that this place wasn't what it was supposed to be, that there was something wrong, unholy, at play. I deserted you but for a brief moment, but I will take you back with great compassion, sighed Joel. We all have doubts, but this is the right decision. This is his place. This is his home. I closed my eyes, the song reaching a fever pitch. Joel strengthened his grip on my arm. I turned the lid on Eddie's urn and felt the world shift. Something waited to receive him, to welcome him. I will repay you for the years that the swarming locust ate, spoke Joel. The young locust, the destroying locust, and the devouring locust. My great army that I sent against you. Praise be, added Masad. Praise him. And they praised. They cheered. They hollered and raised their hands to the sky. And as I turned the lid, there was this weight building in my chest. But I couldn't stop myself. I needed this release. I needed to move on. Then I heard a strange noise, a beeping of sorts, an insistent, machine-like beeping. It was Erin, using the electronic honk of her wheelchair to grab my attention. She just sat there, staring at us, not disappointed, not angry, just terrified. And for that brief moment, there was no shimmer in her look. She was just a scared girl, hoping against hope that I'd get my mind in order. All around me, I saw these people look at me with dilated eyes, mouths open like animals waiting to bite, their arms shivering with excitement. And under my feet, the ground moved. It was subtle, but it was there, a bulge moving just beneath the earth, going from grave to grave, something massive, eagerly awaiting an offering. I looked up at Joel, still clutching my arm, and for the first time, I could see him clearly. This was a sickly man. He wasn't just old, he was ancient. I could see the outlines of his skull, the lining of the veins reaching the edge of his jaw muscles. He was more bone than man, his sunken eyes blackened with rot. Let go, Joel wheezed. Pass him on. Skeletal fingers wrapped around my arm, poking into my skin, beige teeth struggling to hide behind razor-thin lips. The cross around his neck, nothing but gold-colored nickel. How had I not seen this? I turned the lid back on tight and shrugged him off. There was an immediate gasp from the crowd. What are you doing? Yelled Dottie. Masad got angry. Hannah and Garland snarled like animals. Margaret wielded her walking stick like a sword. And behind them were the nameless crowd we'd gathered on our way there, most of which barely even looked human. Some were little more than bone and sinew. Others were so pale their skin seemed translucent. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Aaron beeped again, snapping me to attention. Clutching the urn tight, I tried to push my way past Joel and burst into a sprint. He tripped me, and I dropped the urn. Luckily, the lid held shut. Bronze doesn't break easily. I fell flat on my stomach as the ground beneath me moved. As the bulge buckled, a crack in the ground revealed something underneath. A pulsing, segmented body, white as snow, covered in a thick mucus. It bobbed back and forth like the abdomen of a wasp. It stank of dog's breath. It must have been at least 7 feet wide. A hand gripped my ankle, dragging me back into the crowd. Joel stood ahead of me, lifting the urn. You've already committed him, he said. You can't go back on your word. A bond has been made, and the price must be paid. Would you deny your loved one's salvation? I struggled. Hands grasped me, lifting my head, forcing me to watch. That iron ball in my stomach felt like an egg, ready to hatch. I wanted to beg for forgiveness, but not from whatever god they praised, but from Grandpa. I shouldn't have taken him here to begin with. I should have known better. Joel held the urn high, speaking at the top of his lungs. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in all Judea, and Samaria. He leaned down to look me in the eye, to the cheer of the ghostly mass, of those dying, and those that had long since passed. And I knew, in that moment, that this wouldn't end with Eddie. This wouldn't end until I was part of their congregation, dead in the ground. Joel smiled, knowing that I finally understood, and he grinned to the ends of the earth. There was a metallic clang. I felt hands release me as the congregation panicked. There, right behind Joel, was Erin. She'd gotten up from her chair, hobbled all the way over, and whacked him over the head with her oxygen tank. As Joel crumbled to the ground, they let me go. I managed to twist free, picking up Eddie's urn as I got up. I hurried forward to Erin, leaning her against me. She barely weighed anything. We looked at the crowd of devotees, staring us down with animal intent. They were horrified, angered, and beyond reasoning. There was no doubt that these people would tear us to pieces for our transgressions. There were more of them now, so many more. Joel lifted a finger towards us, cradling the back of his bleeding skull. "You," he cursed. You've denied him. You've rescinded him. You come bearing false witness. You." A rumble, a low, deep rumble. Then a buzz, a locust. It landed on my arm, then took off. But the entire congregation just stared, awestruck. The silence that crept up on us was so intense, I could hear the wind in the juniper tree on the hill. Then I saw them, hundreds of locusts, creeping out of the ground. In the cracks where the thing beneath had broken through, they escaped. Joel had promised it a meal, but it had been denied. That wouldn't stop it, however. It hungered. It would eat no matter what or whom. The locusts first started crawling up Joel's legs, then Dottie's. Unmasked, they started with his hands. Margaret had them chewing on her neck. Hannah and Garland held each other, keeping the song alive. I saw the first drops of blood in the snow. There was a sudden jolt as the ground shifted. Joel's foot sunk into the earth with a sickening crunch. He looked down, then back up at me, his bone-like face aching to smile. "Joy," he screamed. "Joy, to be chosen." Erin tapped my shoulder, reminding me to do what came most natural, to run. The cemetery erupted. Thousands of locusts swarmed the air, tearing the congregation to pieces, stripping them of their clothes, their skin, their hair. I could hear them choking as swarms of creatures forced themselves down their throats. But there were no screams, just songs and praises, joyous laughter as they held one another, thanking whatever God may be. But in seconds, their songs were drowned with the pitter-patter of air-thin wings. And as we ran, despite being 30 feet away, I could still feel the ground shift. Erin kept smacking me on my arm, like trying to get a racehorse to go faster. As I got Erin to her wheelchair, the entire cemetery was engulfed in this mixture of gray and brown, like a descending cloud. A filthy, buzzing cloud, tearing everything into base components, stripping everyone of their identity and purpose. All the while, Joel was laughing. His deathly smile never faded as he sunk into the earth. The greatest joy of his life, to be devoured by whatever god he praised. Chunk by chunk, I got bitten 12 times in less than a minute. I didn't even know locusts could do that. Erin had them stuck in her hair, in her oxygen mask, everywhere. We tried to brush them off as I hurried down the hill, back to the motel. By the time we got to my car, the swarm had already descended from the church. These things were everywhere. I could hear them smacking into the windows of the motel with a rhythmic tapping. There was no question about getting Erin out of here. She was coming with me. I dropped her in the passenger seat and started folding up her wheelchair. She smacked me again, accidentally brushing off a biting locust. "Leave it," she wheezed. "Let's go." There was a dozen of them in the car with us, but we just had to go. I could hear them rattling in the air conditioning. For the second time that day, I backed out of the driveway and broke the speed limit. On my way out of town, I felt that tug in my heart, that thing in me telling me that I was misunderstanding everything, that I was letting myself down, that I was breaking a holy covenant, and that some things were not meant to be understood by people like me, that there was a reason that the first things angels said when revealing themselves to mortals was to not be afraid. My chest ached. A red pulse forced me to blink. Sweat stunned my eyes. Erin placed her hand on mine. All she had was half an oxygen tank and a way out of town. That seemed like more than enough. "I'm scared too," she said. "Keep going." So I did. We were halfway to Rapid City when I slowed down, easing my cramped foot. The locust had died. My mind was quiet. Eddie's urn rested carefully on Erin's lap, and as I looked over at her, I saw the gray membrane clear from her eyes. She took off her oxygen mask, breathed free, and smiled. This was some time ago. I don't expect everyone to believe it, but if you look it up, Locust is still there. Maybe new people have moved in, others who have felt the call. I found the perfect spot for Eddie. There's this place not far from his childhood home. where you can watch the fishermen bring in the catch of the day. All year long, you can smell fresh crab stew, Eddie's favorite. I knew he'd love it there. At first, I thought Erin was going to die. Turns out many of her problems weren't as bad as we'd imagined. Sure, she had some muscle atrophy from spending years in that chair, but physical therapy would go a long way. Apparently, there'd never been anything wrong with her eyes, and her lung problems were inconclusive. The doctor figured it was some sort of perpetual allergic reaction, possibly to insect bites. Away from that town, Erin looks to make an almost full recovery. I don't know what to make of all this. I think there are plenty of reasons for people to go to places and find comfort in their beliefs. I think there are good reasons for us to deal with what we are and what we will become. Much like all the people of Locust, we find our comforts in knowing we belong in this world, even after we're gone. Thinking back on all of this, I think Joel was right about one thing, that leaving this life behind is nothing to be feared, that it is as natural as being born or falling in love, that it is reasonable to have faith about a merciful and benevolent creation, whatever form that may take. But I know that none of that benevolence and none of that mercy lived in the town of Locust, South Dakota. My name is Mark, and I'm a detective. Not like on the force or anything, a private eye like in the movies. It's kind of the family business. My grandfather was one, and my dad and I grew up in that world, and it was only natural that I go into it too. It's not as exciting a job as you would think if you go by Hollywood. It's mostly sitting in your car for 10 hours at a time, waiting to take pictures of cheating spouses to show the spouse who is paying you to prove that they're being cheated on. It's kind of a bummer sometimes. People get married, they get cheated on, they get divorced. So often, kids are caught up in the middle of it all. Now and then something crazy comes your way though, or something exciting. I want to tell you guys about one of the crazy ones, the craziest. It happened a few years ago, and sometimes I still can't convince myself it was real. I'm not religious, and I don't believe in the supernatural. At least, I didn't until Benson Street. Now, I'm not so sure. A woman got a hold of me in August of 2020. She had lost contact with her sister. She came into my office and spun a pretty crazy story. Her sister lived in a small town in Michigan called Franklin's Green. My client was named Shelley. She was 62, and her sister was a little younger. They were close and spoke almost every day, but for the last month, her sister hadn't answered her calls. And then Shelley did a little digging and came across a couple of news stories that were a little hard to believe. They said that everyone who lived on Benson Street had gone missing. There were 8 houses on the dead-end street, and every person who lived in them had seemingly vanished into thin air. I mean, I read the stories myself. After Shelley left, I did my digging, and she was right. It was crazy, and I was a little surprised the story hadn't gotten more attention. I called Shelley back that night and told her I would take her case. I didn't usually travel that far for a job, but the next morning I packed a few things up and left my office in Cincinnati. Hours later I arrived in Franklin's Green. There was a little crappy motel, and I checked in and then headed right for Benson Street. It was smack dab in the middle of a little sleepy neighborhood, lower middle class, mostly ranch-style homes. The entrance to Benson Street was completely roped off, with yellow police tape stretched between a telephone pole and a stop sign. I parked nearby and decided to canvass the surrounding streets. I knocked on doors, stopped, and chatted with an old man out watering his garden and stuff like that. No one had much for me. Everyone on Benson Street had simply been there one day and gone the next. No one knew why. The people I spoke with were happy to share their theories with me. The street was full of drug addicts who had all gotten high and wandered off. There was a gas leak that killed everyone in their sleep, and the gas company removed the bodies to avoid suspicion. Nothing I was told seemed very likely. By the time I had spoken with a number of people, the sun had gone down. I debated going back to the motel and starting the next morning, but I thought I would at least check out Shelley's sister's house. I grabbed my flashlight from my duffel bag in my trunk and ducked under the yellow tape. Shelley's sister was named Mary, and she had been married to a guy named Tom for nearly 40 years. They had 2 children who were grown and lived out of state. Shelley had told me they were worried about their mother and father as well, and hadn't been able to reach them. Nor had Mary, and Tom reached out to them. Mary's house was third on the left, and I did a slow circle around it, shining my flashlight in the dark. I'm not sure what clues I was looking for, but there were none to find. One thing that took me by surprise a bit was just how big the houses on Benson Street were compared to the rest of the neighborhood. I made my way back around to the front of the house and went up onto the porch. I tried the doorknob and was surprised to find the house unlocked. I was sure the cops had been through all of the houses on the street, but as I stepped inside I saw no evidence of this. I worked through the ground floor slowly, resisting the urge to turn lights on as I went. I didn't want to draw any attention to myself, and one of these houses with lights burning in every window would be very noticeable to anyone who drove by Benson Street. The home was eerie. It really was as if Mary and her husband had simply vanished. There was a half-empty can of Coke on the kitchen island and dishes that needed to be washed in the sink. A cloud of flies buzzed here and there, eating the food residue that had been waiting to be cleaned away. A door in the kitchen opened up to a set of stairs leading down. I decided to save the basement for last and went upstairs instead. I worked slowly, just as I had on the ground floor. There were 4 bedrooms. The master bedroom was the married couple obviously, and another of the bedrooms was a guest room. The 3rd bedroom had been converted into a home office. The laptop on the desk there was dead. I found the charger and plugged it and then went into the 4th bedroom, which had a treadmill and an exercise bike. I had saved the master bedroom for last and worked my way through the dresser there, finding nothing but clothes. The closet was another story. There was a shoebox up on the shelf, hidden underneath folded bedsheets and a hand-stitched quilt. I pulled the box down and opened it, surprised to find a knife. The knife was ornate, the blade curved, and the hilt made of bone and wrapped in leather. Etchings had been carved into the bone, and I unwrapped the leather to better see. I can only describe the etchings as strange runes, almost like an alphabet. They were very letter-like, but damned if I knew what they meant. I took pictures of the knife and then replaced it in the box and hid it once again. All that was left was the basement, and I was surprised to realize I had been putting it off, even dreading going down there. I had no other choice though, and headed down into the kitchen with heavy steps, and then down once more. I swept my light across the open basement. It was unfinished, the walls cement as well as the floor. Small frosted windows sat near the beams of the floor above. The basement had just been used for storage. I found cardboard boxes filled with Christmas decorations, and a small wooden chest filled with important papers like birth certificates and old pay stubs. Above me, a creak. I froze and turned off my light. A thud, another creak. Someone was walking on the ground floor. I wrestled with what to do, and I could feel my heart thumping wildly in my chest. Did I call out, admit that I was trespassing? Did I go upstairs and try to sneak out? Did I stay and hope they didn't come down? I crept slowly to the foot of the wooden stairs that I had come down. I had left the basement door open and cursed myself for my stupidity. I listened to the footsteps above me. Sweat stung my eyes, and I wiped it away. The footsteps came into the kitchen, and I moved away from the bottom of the stairs. I looked for a place to hide, and wedged myself in behind a stack of plastic totes along the wall just as I heard footsteps on the stairs. I held my breath. I peeked out, but it was so dark down here I couldn't see much more than a dark shape. I paused at the foot of the stairs, and then turned and went back up. I waited for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes. I didn't hear any movement upstairs. I left my hiding spot and went to the foot of the stairs. I took them slowly, exited into the kitchen, and then shut the door as quietly as I could. I paused there for a long time, listening. If anyone else was still in the house, they weren't moving. I hurried to the front door and pulled it open. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind me. I rushed off of the porch and into the middle of the street. I turned and looked at the house and felt sheer terror as my eyes swept up to one of the windows that looked out into the street from the master bedroom. Someone was standing there, staring right at me, the same dark shadow I had seen in the basement. I turned and ran down the street to my car. I rushed to the motel and went inside my room. The locked door wasn't enough. I pushed the heavy circular table that served as an eating area in the small room in front of the door too, and found myself exhausted. I fell into a restless sleep. I dreamed of a dark shape and of that curved blade. When I woke the next morning, I thought about going to the local police and telling them who I was and who had hired me, but in my experience, most cops don't take kindly to private detectives, and I was afraid they'd keep me from Benson Street. So I showered, dressed, and headed back over. I felt a little more comfortable in the daytime. I went back into Mary's house and looked for evidence of someone else having been there the night before but found none. Then I went back outside and started at the end of the street and tried the front doors as I moved around the cul-de-sac and went up the other side. A lot of doors were locked, but 2 were unlocked. The houses I could enter were a lot like the ones I had been in the night before. It seemed as if whoever had lived there had just vanished or up and left without taking anything. In the first house, I found a full set of luggage, and it didn't seem like the overstuffed closet and drawers full of clothes had been touched. No one had packed for a trip. In the other house, I found something rather alarming. It sat right out on a bedside table in the master bedroom, a knife exactly like the one I had found in Mary's home, hidden away. The same bone handle, the same runes carved into it, the same curving blade, sharp as can be. I went back to the middle unlocked house and began to search. It took me a couple of hours, but then I found it, stashed away in a floor vent, an identical knife. I left quickly and went to my car. I found a little diner and stopped for lunch and sat at the table with my phone, searching online for any sort of information I could find on the knives. I searched for news about cults in the area and came up with nothing. I had taken pictures of the knives and tried to find anything about the runes, but ran into a dead end there as well. After lunch, I went back to Benson Street and stood on the sidewalk. I was fairly sure that if I broke into the locked homes, I would find knives there as well. I walked slowly past the houses and paused at the end of the street. Past the end of the road were woods, mostly evergreens. A dirty little path cut from the end of the street and through the lawns of the 2 homes in front of me and to the trees. I started down the path. It was well worn and continued well into the woods, curving around trees and overgrown plants. I walked along it for nearly half an hour before I saw it. The church was old and made of wood, squat and slanted. A spire went up over the front double doors, a strange symbol that resembled an inverted cross made of what looked like iron nailed to the front. I went to the building and tried the doors. They opened freely. Surely the police hadn't missed this strange building. Inside were a few rows of pews and an altar at the back of the large open room. A large leather-bound book with yellowing pages that curled at the corners sat open on the altar next to a silver cup stained red inside. I couldn't read the book. It was written in the same strange runes that were etched on the handles of the knives. I took pictures of a few pages and hurried back outside. Standing in the church, I had felt a growing sense of unease, almost like I was being watched. I thought of the shadowy figure that had been watching me from the window of Mary's home and shivered. I went back to Benson Street and rushed to my car. I drove to the safety of my motel and went in and locked the door, barring it once more with the table. I called Shelley and told her about the church. She hadn't ever heard her sister or brother-in-law speak of it. I hung up with her, and it struck me for the first time that the sisters were named Mary Shelley. One of their parents had a literary sense of humor. I called Mary and Tom's 2 children next, one after the other, and asked about their parents' religious stances. They told me their parents were Catholic, but not practicing. Church hadn't been a thing in their lives as kids. I sat on the end of the bed and scrolled through the internet, trying to find the strange inverted cross sigil I had seen on the front of the church. It took hours, but eventually I found it. I clicked on the picture, and it took me to an amateur website that seemed to be all about various demons and hellspawn. It was the symbol of something called the Nameless One, and it was said he would bring his followers great wealth and power in exchange for sacrifices. I thought immediately of how the homes on Benson Street were much bigger than those nearby. I set my phone aside and shivered. The whole thing was freaking me out. I do not scare easily, but that job I had taken was proving to be a strange one, and I couldn't get over the feeling that I was messing with something I shouldn't. When the sun went down, I drove to the local bar, a place called Mel's. It was busy, and I took a stool at the bar and had a beer. Over the course of a few hours, I spoke to a few townspeople about Benson Street. I was truthful with who I was and what I was doing. A lot of people clammed up when I brought up the street. I didn't ask about the church or the symbol I had seen, but I did ask about the houses and how they seemed to be so much more expensive. One old guy gave me something. Everyone on that street was a weirdo, he told me, and we all know it. Wherever they are, it isn't good. Another patron of the bar brought up how people in the area had been going missing regularly for the last few years. Drifters and homeless folk, no one important, no one who got the police involved very much. Back at my motel, I called Mary and Tom's oldest. I asked if they had grown up in the house on Benson Street, and he told me no. His parents had bought it a few years ago after Tom had retired a few years early. I thanked him and hung up. I was asleep when a thump at my door woke me. I went to the peephole and peered out but could see no one. Fear gripped my heart with its icy hand. I went to the window and carefully pulled the blind back at the edge and looked out into the parking lot. A line of 4 people stood there, right in the middle of the black pavement, staring right at my room. It was dark and I couldn't quite make out who they were. Man or woman, I couldn't tell. I had no idea of their age. They wore dark clothing, robes of some sort, with the hoods pulled up. As I watched, they turned as a group and walked out of the lot and across the street. I watched them until they faded into the darkness. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning I went back to Benson Street. I was drawn to it, or more specifically, to the church in the woods. I hurried down the path and entered that strange building again. Someone else had been there. The book and cup that had been on the altar were gone. I did a more thorough search of the building and found a small trap door just behind the altar. I lifted the hatch open and shone my flashlight into the hole. A rickety wooden ladder led down 10 or so feet to a dirt floor. I took a deep breath and started to climb down. There was a tunnel curving away to the right when I got off the ladder and turned around. I kept my light on and crept forward. It twisted this way and that until it opened up into a large chamber, and I found the people who had lived on Benson Street. They all lay dead on the dirty floor, nude with their arms crossed over their chests. I needed to tell the police. I turned and came face to face with a man in a hooded robe. Intruder, he screamed at me, and I pushed past him and ran. I knew he was chasing me. I could hear his heavy footsteps right behind me. A chill blew through the tunnel as I ran. Voices burst forth from nowhere, speaking a language I couldn't understand. I got to the ladder and began to climb. I got to the top and rolled out of the hole and turned and used my foot to slam the door shut. There was no way to latch it. I stood and turned, shocked to find 100 or more candles had been placed throughout the church, all burning. So 2 or more robed figures. One came at me as the trap door behind me burst open, and my original pursuer came through. I tussled with the new robed figure. He wrapped his arms around me, but I shoved him off into the altar. The candles there shook and then fell. A musty carpet that led from the altar to the front door lit immediately. Soon the room was alive with flame. The robed figures howled, and I was forgotten as they attempted to put the fire out. I ran for the door and burst through it and into the woods. It was still morning. The sun hung low in the sky, the light getting cut off by the many trees. I turned and looked at the church. It was burning. No one came out after me. I turned and ran for Benson Street. I didn't stop running until I made it to my car. I drove to the motel and checked out and packed up my things. I didn't call the police until I was an hour away from the town. I told them what I had found and hung up before they could start asking me questions. Then I called Shelley and told her everything I had found. The knives, the church, the robed figures. I could tell she didn't believe me, and she started to cry and curse me out for not giving her something real. I understood though. I hardly believed the words coming out of my own mouth. In the end, I didn't speak with Shelley again. I didn't go after her for the unpaid balance she owed me. A week or so later, at home, I searched the internet for any sort of news story about the church behind Benson Street, but only found one little article that had been written in the local paper about a fire in the woods there. It didn't mention the church. In the 3 years since then, I've seen robed figures a handful of times. Sometimes I don't trust my own eyes and wonder if I'm hallucinating. I don't think I am. I think the followers of the Nameless One are keeping an eye on me. They never approach me, they never threaten me, but they are there, right? They are watching.